Welcome to Table Talk, the place for deep conversations in the Geekverse. And trust me, when we tear into a subject, we go deep. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. Each episode, I'll be talking with one or more creators, authors, illustrators, publishers, or other movers and shakers in games, TV, books, movies, or other areas of the Geekverse. Regular guests include Douglas A. Burton, the author of Faraway Bird, a multi-award-winning historical fiction novel of the Byzantine Empress Theodora. He's also the author of The Heroine's Labyrinth, an alternative story structure to the hero's journey that often occurs in stories with feminine heroes. That structural framework frequently comes up in our analysis of story. Brianna de Silva, she's the director and co-writer of The Cultists, a Lovecraftian comedy mockumentary-style web show here on YouTube, and the author of The City of Reckoning, an epic fantasy novel of political intrigue, the ethics of war, and young love. Cameron Pasha is a screenwriter, director, novelist, and was a writer and producer on the series Kings, a producer on NBC's Bionic Woman, and a co-producer and writer for Sleeper Cell. He's also written for the CW series Nikita and Roswell, New Mexico. He's been breaking news from inside Lucasfilm, Disney, and Hollywood. His analysis and commentary have become very popular on YouTube. We regularly meet to discuss and analyze stories, and when we do, we dive into graduate-level seminars on story structure and writing. Come on in and let's go deep. And when I say we're going deep, I mean you'd better bring your hard suit. Other guests have included Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels Once Upon a Unicorn, the creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and the author of Star Wars: A Pirate's Price, the book that explains why the Millennium Falcon is on the planet Batu at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Mark Tassin, the creator of the World of Ataltis, head of Mechanical Muse, former director of the Gen Con Writers Symposium, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. Let's see, who else?
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. Not yet. Maybe soon, though. But I have interviewed Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games, crowdfunder extraordinaire, and publisher of many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. Brian Colin, sculptor of the world of Revelo, Monster Busts, and the creator of the vast, grim, dark horror RPG. Ajit George, the Dungeons & Dragons author. We talked about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft and the development of the Journeys to the Radiant Citadel.
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne and the goddess of death.
Well, actually, that interview got rather spicy, so I think I'd better just keep that one to myself. Kate Wilson, a YouTuber, actress, host, and prolific geek guru who's now working to make a new show dedicated to the world of tabletop gaming a reality. So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride, because it's time to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and all of geekdom through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger, ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is great to see you. Welcome to my home. Welcome to the office. And welcome to Table Talk. It is great to have everyone here tonight. It's been a long time since just Brianna and I have been able to be here on the show together. So we have the opportunity tonight. And so we decided to talk.
Hey, you're mute. You just muted yourself.
Oh, I did. I moved on.
I was about to try to send you a message.
Oh, I noticed that I like my cameras at an angle or something like that. I'm not sure.
I think you accidentally pressed the button.
Yeah.
The cost of convenience.
Yes. Huh.
Hello, everyone.
Well, whatever. There we go.
Oh, no.
All right. How have you been doing, Brianna?
Pretty good. I guess I should give one update to the Table Talk Geekverse community, whatever you guys want to call yourselves. Which is that I have, this has been since the last time we did it, right? Yes. Whatever. Yeah. So I finished a screenplay recently, and I'm sending it to contest and everything. So pretty excited about that.
And which one is this one?
What's that?
We talked about this one a little bit.
A little bit. It's my feature horror script, but I'm my goal is to make this as my first feature film. And I've been working on it for more than a year now, on and off. It's gone through 8 revisions. I've been working on it with under Cameron's mentorship for the past like 4 revisions or so. So yeah, and it is now ready to be pitched and submitted to contests and things like that. So it's a pretty big milestone to get a screenplay to that point. That's my
that's huge. It's huge. It's huge.
Yeah.
This is the first one that has gotten to this point. So there we go.
Yeah. And I'm really proud of it. So yay.
All right. One down.
One down. Yes. It'd be cool if in the next 6 months I had another one down. And if that one was award winning, that's the goal. I'm going to submit it to a bunch of stuff. That'd be cool. But yeah.
So the goal is to have another one done in 6 months.
Well, I feel like any results that come from this particular screenplay might be within the next 6 months.
Oh.
So that seems like I feel like my eyes are set on like a 6-month timeline of like, what can I do within the next 6 months to get myself that much more Hollywood ready? So having another one done would be great, but we'll see. Got lots of stuff to do.
Let's see who we've got here. Say hi in the chat if you're here. We've got James Bacon here. We've got Charlie. Welcome, Charlie. We've got Sable. We've got Nicole. Nicole from Nicole's Bookish Nook is here.
Nicole.
Welcome. Let's see. BGD is also just showed up here. All right. We were talking about the Iliad, and I know BGD had some opinions on the Iliad in the Discord server. But all right. So how do we want to set this up?
Yeah,
you read it a while back ago.
That's right. So that's a good way to frame this. I first read this book. It'd be interesting to look at when it was, but it was sometime like maybe about 7 years ago ish, maybe a little longer. I don't know. It was a while ago. And I didn't reread the whole thing for this, but I read like the first maybe 20% of it or so to prepare and to kind of jog my memory. But what I had forgotten about, and I didn't realize until I started reading it again, was just how much this book had influenced me. It had influenced me specifically as a writer of epic fantasy. Like I noticed like in early, like it, because I was working on it kind of early and when I was working on City of Reckoning, and a lot of the sort of the tone and the, I guess sort of the writing style, I would say, leaked into some of my own writing. And so it was kind of cool coming back to that and being like, oh yeah, I forgot about this. And I've been wanting to reread it for a while. So it was really cool to step back into it.
That's fascinating. And I really want to talk about that, about how, because we just talked about City of Reckoning, not long ago.
Right.
So that's fresh on our minds. So that's very interesting. That's so influential. I know it's going to be really influential on me. I'm going through a series. I'm in a phase right now where I'm about to review a whole bunch of games and read a whole bunch of stuff for projects that are upcoming as far as game design goes, and then also story writing. So I hammered, I hammered Dominion, which is nonfiction, but that is by Tom Holland. And that was about the relationship between Christianity and paganism. And so that was fresh on my mind as I jumped right into the Iliad.
Then you went deep into paganism.
Right. And then I went into paganism. Right. Yes, exactly. So that
that's a cool way to frame it.
Was fresh. Yeah, it was. It really was. So that was fresh on my mind as I went into the Iliad, and now I'm about to go forward into several other stories. Like I was about to start the Odyssey, but I took a little bit of a breather over a couple of days. So I'm about to do the Odyssey, and we can talk about all of those. But this was a fantastic way to jump in, because this is the first time that I had been through it, and I hate that. I should have been through it a long time ago, but I know it's going to be influential on me because I loved it. There were a lot of things that were surprising. There's like, oh, so this must surprise everyone when they go through it. That it is such a small part of what we call the Trojan War. So these will be things that, like, I'm sure everybody's talked about from, the standard things you say, I guess, when you talk about the Iliad. This is a very small part of the Trojan War.
Very late into it, like it's towards the end, because its readers would have known that story. It'd be like if we started a story with Jesus on the cross. Like most people know what happened before that. We know that he turned water into wine and stuff like that. So it was
or more like Jesus at like the what the Garden of wait, was it
Gethsemane,
like when
yeah,
he's about
yeah.
to be when he's like going in, like if you started like with he's about to be crucified and you got the story of the Last Supper, you know,
Yeah,
and the
that's
betrayal,
better.
and then you're gonna end with the like it is like that. It's like that. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no need to set anything because it's the audience at the time was fully aware of why the
The
children
audience
were named.
knows.
Yeah.
Right, and there are a number of other stories like these epic poems that had told us all about these things that come forward, and and I was so glad that I did this too because there are elements of this that directly I was told to read the Odyssey directly for what I was writing, but I wanted to do the Iliad first. But there's stuff in here that is that I drew from, and I was like, okay, so I'm glad that I went through it. But even something like, okay, the Paris and the apple is not in here. I mean, like any cause of the war, Paris.
We never hear about Achilles' heel in this.
Yeah, Achilles' heel is not in here. Yeah, now I want to talk about that later because
like, when I first read it, I was waiting for it to happen. And I was like, what? Oh, that's not in here.
Achilles has got his Achilles heel. Right. So there's nothing in here about him being invulnerable. Nothing about having been dipped in the river Styx, which I actually think this is cooler. I mean, this is jumping ahead in the notes, but one of my favorite scenes in this entire epic poem was when Hephaestus is forging new armor for Achilles, and Achilles having God-forged armor to go into battle with is way cooler than him having been dipped in Styx, the river Styx. Like I didn't know anything about that. I have completely missed that. So the idea that they have got his armor, that his original armor, which apparently his original armor is really, really cool anyway. We can talk about that anyway. But it's been taken from him, and then his mother goes down, and in godlike fashion, Hephaestus says something in my translation is like, oh, don't bother about the armor. Like it's really going to make no big deal for Hephaestus to be able to forge magnificent armor for Achilles, and he does it like overnight, right? And he makes this fantastic. So that so substituting the invulnerability of the river Styx with him wearing God-forged armor when he goes on the battle, way better in my opinion, way better.
The story takes a lot of time to describe armor and weaponry and things like that. Like that's very important for I want to say like setting the tone, but it's not just that. It's like that's part of the characters. Like it's part of who they are, what kind of weapon they use, and even the gods. Here are the gods' chariots described in detail, and it's like it's kind of like describing. It's almost like describing someone's clothing and how it expresses them. Like it's part of these characters.
It absolutely is. By the way, I'll just say hi to a couple of people. Great old ones. Welcome.
Great old ones. Oh no, the great old ones are in the chat.
Great. I completely agree, Bacon. Agamemnon. Agamemnon is one of my favorite names. I completely agree with that. Agamemnon is totally a cool name. Although if I just found myself as an ancient Greek and I needed to pick a name, my name would be Ida-Ticades. I love the name Ida-Ticades. I don't know why. I just like the way that it sounds. I'd be Ida-Ticades. Drood and Fuzz is also here. So welcome. I know Drood and Fuzz is not on our time zone at all. So thank you for getting out to talk about this. But yes, so what you're talking about, okay, we can talk about armor for a moment here because we came off of that. There is a significant element of what today we might call gear porn. This yes, like when you're talking about like what kind of equipment, I mean, what kind of equipment does somebody have? Like when you've got the suit up scenes in today's movies where like Batman is getting his armor,
you have a lot of suit ups going on.
Yeah, all of that kind of stuff like that. So I've heard that called gear porn. That's in modern day when you're like going off on like what type of stuff they've got. And that was certainly a part of that. I mean, what type of spear, the bronze shod spear and this. And I said, there's a lot of different God forged items that they've got. So yes, the armor, the weapons, the items like the staff that Agamemnon's got and its history and all of that. There is definitely this, certainly a lot of attention paid to armor, equipment, gear. That's an important part of the story.
Yes. Oh, there was another note I was going to make. I had to check my notes to remember. I was going to say something related to that. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I was talking about how like the style of the prose had leaked into my writing before. Something about the epic tone is really important in the story. And when you're looking at like the Iliad versus the Odyssey, it's interesting because these are the kinds of books that they're really worth rereading like many years apart when you've changed as a person. And I'm appreciating that now, because I knew I would appreciate reading this again. But now that I'm older, like I'm, right now I'm going on 31, and I was in my early 20s the first time I read it. And I remember when I read these the first time, I enjoyed the Iliad. I enjoyed the Odyssey a lot more than the Iliad. Originally, there was a lot of parts of the Iliad that I kind of like skimmed over, where it was like, oh, and then his uncle, when you were like describing the backstory of every person that died. And at the time, I was like, I don't care about this. Just get to the main story. But the Iliad, weirdly enough, it was the one that I remembered more fondly. Like it stuck with me more than the Odyssey did, even though like the experience of reading it the first time, I liked the Odyssey more. But reading it a second time, I felt completely differently about those passages, because what those passages are doing emotionally is they're humanizing every person that dies. So it's not just like, okay, we're just a bunch of bodies that are just being destroyed. Like because we're pausing to mention these details about all these people, I feel like it adds this much more emotional resonance to the war. And it makes all these different characters important. You're reminded of the fact that, okay, these two brothers died, and now their father at home doesn't have anyone to pass his inheritance on. Like that's like such a, it adds so much more depth to a war story. So that was just an interesting thing I noted. Like it feels different reading it now.
Okay, let's talk about that, because I think we'll just flow naturally from subject to subject. We're not going to go like chronologically through this, I don't think.
Yeah, let's just
we'll just go
as the conversation
leads. Things are talking right. Yeah, where the conversation leads, because I did pick up on that as well. Like I said, first of all, and I texted, I think you and Doug about this. I said one of the results of this, of having read this, is definitely that I'm going to become more violent.
Yeah, and at first I was like, what do you mean?
Everyday life, but as far as storytelling goes.
I needed you to clarify it, so you should tell them what you mean by that, because it was cool.
Yeah, okay, so naturally I'm apparently a violent storyteller, but like this one does go to a different level than do the inspirations for violence that had come from, in this style of storytelling, from biblical storytelling or from like the Silmarillion storytelling from Tolkien or something like that. Because like I was very careful when I was writing Theophany, and as I will continue to go in and write Theophany, I was using a lot of biblical phrases for different violent acts. Like I was studying what different types of phrases were used to incorporate that phraseology in order to invoke that. Homer goes definitely to a different level. I mean, Homer is
R-rated as opposed to PG-13.
a rated R poem, right? And I want to talk to you later about like the impact of reading this versus seeing it on screen, versus how this is told in this style of storytelling versus others. But we do have this very violent story where he's not afraid to tell you what happens to someone when they die. I made note, because I think this is telling you something about the nature of battle and warfare at this particular time and what's important. Because there are a couple of times in the story, I made note of them when I was listening to it, because I was like, oh, that's a little bit different. They did make note of like the people of the line, or the spearmen in the line, that you're leading. So there are other people there, but they're only mentioned a couple of times. Much more common when these people are fighting, they're telling you this person killed that person in this way, and this is right, how this person particularly got there. It is an extremely personalized warfare that is going on.
That's a great way to put it.
Very personalized warfare.
Personalized, and there's also an element of, I would say, like these characters, how they die, how they kill, it's being immortalized. The fact that it's being written down in such specific details, it's like, it feels to me like a way of honoring these characters, because they're written as if they're historical characters, and I'm sure there's some history behind at least some of this, right? And that's kind of what I feel like is happening, like emotionally. It's like, these are these characters who have acted out of courage, and we're going to record that so everyone can remember how they acted on the battlefield.
There are two. That's one element, and then also toward the beginning, and this is like the second book or second chapter, however you want to say, that he records all of the different ships that come from all the different places, and how many different ships there were, and who was leading them, and they'd come from this city. And there's a long exposition on that, and then you end up with all of. And what it reminds me of, I was like, oh, this is like all of the recording of the children in Genesis. Like when you get to the point where this person had this person, and it was the son of this person, and whatever.
That was really important to ancient Hebrew culture, right?
Right. So you're like, okay, well, maybe if I were reading this today, you're like, okay, well, so you can skip that part because we've got this list of long. And so, like, in the same sort of vein, you might say when we get to chapter 2, when we're like talking about all of the different city states and how many ships they brought and who their leader was. Okay, so maybe, yes, you could skip that today. But what we're looking at is we're saying, why was that important for Homer to record? And I think it must be the same reason. And then the same reason we're talking about all these deaths. We're talking about a very, very personalized warfare. And you're talking about this person who was the son of this person had done this and whatever, was killed in this way. You're recording that, I think, for the same reasons that something like Genesis records all of that. And that tells you, even if you're like, what's the story? Okay, well, then maybe you can skip it. But if you're trying to understand what's important to what this means is important to Homerian Greeks, it tells you a lot. Right.
That it's like that. Yeah, I don't think I can add anything else except for what we've already said. But yeah, another thing I would say is also, I guess, there's an element of like what it makes me think of in compared to modern day storytelling, like what the equivalent is the epic, like Zack Snyder style slow-mo in the middle of a battle. In fact, you could say 300, the movie 300, feels influenced by the Iliad. I was just thinking about that as you were talking, that like, because it has a similar feeling of like, okay, obviously it's the same, generally the same era, same culture, but that movie has a lot of those moments of like, okay, now we're fighting, and we're going to slow, and we're going to show the details of how this kill happens, and we're making it really cool. And I feel like that is very similar to what's happening on the page when we slow down and we describe the details of the spear that this person's about to throw, and what kind of metal it's made out of, and what its history is. And then we describe the details of where it hits the other person's body. And then, and the god gets involved. And that's another topic. And, moves it in this way, and they're injured in this specific way. Like, it feels like this is a slow-mo moment,
Yeah. So also in this story, and we'll probably come back to these topics as we think of other things and things like that. But yeah, in this story, the humans are very close to gods.
Yes.
In a lot of ways, in at least two major ways. They're very close to gods in the fact that the gods are right there and are another faction of this war.
Yeah, gods care about this war. I mean, the gods are the ones that are blamed for it too in this one. I think that was kind of a debate about who was at fault for this war. Homer makes it clear here, it was the gods. They started it. It was not Helen's fault. It was not any of these people's fault. It was the gods.
And but then also they're close to gods because so many of them are the children of gods.
Yes.
Like many of these characters actually have direct lineage from gods.
Yeah. A lot of demigods.
They're demigods, right? Yeah. So, I watched, I read the whole thing. I listened to the whole thing. I listened to the whole thing. I took notes as I was listening to it. Then I did go and watch some analysis, so much as you're allowed to find on YouTube anymore, given its current lack of a substantive search capability. But I did, watch some of them, and some people were like, well, this demonstrates the Greeks as very religious people. okay, yeah, in a certain sense, but also they're operating in an environment where I don't even know if you would call it religion in that sense, because like the God is standing right there, and like that guy could be your father, and they do things. So yeah, they make sacrifices and things like that, but they're not religious in the sense of, well, like Protestant Christianity or something. Like that's not what it's showing you. It's showing you something very different. Yeah, very
It's
different
just a
kind of relationship to God.
very different relationship. I feel like comparing it, especially just in general to Abrahamic religions, the relationship that you see here in this book that the Greeks have with their gods, even if you take away the fact that they can see them there physically, it's very fascinating. It's something that I've thought about a lot just outside of Homer. But with the way it is specifically shown in the Iliad, it's very fascinating to me because like you can compare like I think it's a pretty common motif in a lot of the more Abrahamic type religions to have this sort of relationship with God that is one of submission and obedience, and the sense that God's going to work everything together for good. You should just trust him. That's not the case. That's not the relationship that the Greeks have with the gods. The gods work everything together for their own benefit. And it may or may not be for good, depending on how you define that. Like it's like they do things that are motivated by their own petty jealousies and like all these other vices that the gods have, And so it's not like an element of, just strict obedience and submission. It's like, which God's side are you going to take? because you and that God may or may not answer your prayer too. We see that like they may or may not, depending on their agendas. And so there's this element of, it's fascinating, like the Greek, the ancient Greek, how would you say, I guess, philosophy, like their sense of how they thought of themselves as humans in the world. It was one that was like, you were supposed to, like, it's wise to know your place. It's wise to know that you shouldn't fight against the gods too much, because then they'll put you back into your place. And that, like, we see that a lot in a lot of different Greek myths, that like you shouldn't challenge them too much because they'll show you. But at the same time, the gods aren't perfect, and sometimes they're incorrect about things. And so a little bit of push and pull is okay. It's like the sort of strife with the gods in a sense. It's very fascinating because it's different from the modern West, I guess.
Well, and also that it's a lot easier to explain what's going on in the world about why this person may have something bad happen to them and this didn't work out, if you have this whole pantheon of gods, which can be in conflict with each other, that you don't have.
It makes more sense to me.
Yeah, if you don't have that in a monotheistic environment where everything comes, then you have things like the problem of evil and why.
Yeah, you don't have the problem of evil in Greek mythology.
You don't have that problem. No. Yeah, when you're operating in the environment of the Iliad, it's because you got all these multiple gods. They want different things. They've got, like, you're being pulled in all these different directions with these gods. Even like when you think about someone who is like, taken out of the way of a bullet just in time, but it kills somebody else.
Yeah.
And be like, praise God, look, but it killed this other person. Like, if you're operating in a monotheistic environment, you're like, why would this good God, like, move you out of the way of the bullet, even though it like goes through the head of the person behind you? Is that, is that a God be praised kind of moment? But that's exactly what happens here in the Iliad. I mean, I thought about that exactly as they were describing that. I forget exactly which character it was and what god it was, but somebody hurls a spear at somebody, and it might be Athena who like deflects the spear away from her, favorite hero, and then Homer records that like goes through the throat of somebody else behind him. Records that because Athena didn't care about that person. So yes, in that context, Athena protected this person by diverting a spear. And didn't really care about the person
another
that it went through.
Another note about that was your quick question. Did your translation use the Greek or the Roman names for the gods?
The Greek.
Okay, good. And mine annoyingly, the one I was just using annoyingly used the Roman ones, and so every time I had to look up. So let's just stick to the Greek names for this, because I know the characters by the Greek names, so I always had to look up like, what does that mean? Who is that? So at first I'm like, who's Minerva? Oh, that is Athena. Okay, gotcha.
Athena, yeah.
Athena. So But yeah, I mean, they're they're kind of assholes sometimes, the gods. Like, but oh, there was a specific moment of Hera that I found hilarious, where she was having one of her arguments with Zeus, as they always do. And what was it that she was saying? I'm trying to remember the context. This was one of the early books, because that's as far as I got. But because she was, I think, trying to get him to admit that he was helping the Trojans, right? Because that's what it was. He was on the Trojan side. She was on the other, what do you call it? Which is the other Greeks, and the Aegeans. Is that what they're? I can't remember.
The Argives.
Argives. Thank you. I was like, there's an R, there's an A, and there's a G in there somewhere. And she made some mentioning about how, like, oh, there's these cities over here, you know, whatever. She mentioned something that there are these hundreds of cities, and they make all sorts of sacrifices to me. I don't care if you destroy them. I don't care. She's like, I don't give a fuck, basically. Like, she does not, like, she's just such a cold-hearted goddess. You know, she's like, you know, so you can do all these things. You can choose a god and like do everything right, and they still may, just because they have their own agendas, you know, allow you to get destroyed because they have some other thing they're trying to do, some other conflict with another god. Like, there's no guarantee of justice or even order. Like, it's kind of an interesting way to make sense of the chaos of the world, I feel like.
Well, but also to the contrary, that like Poseidon, and it was actually the very start of the Odyssey, because I did start it even though I put it down. But he was like, Poseidon was like, hey, there are people who are like performing some sacrifices to me over there. I need to make sure I be there. I make sure I am there. I need to go down there. Like, right, like they're making a big deal about sacrificing some stuff. So I'm gonna go down there and check that. You know, I'll be present during this thing.
Yeah,
they're like,
yeah, you should sacrifice. That's the thing. You should, because it won't hurt you to sacrifice. It's just not guaranteed that it'll help you.
But it's not guaranteed to help you, right? So yeah, they're very personal. I mean, they're very right there. I mean, they might as well be people, except for they are immortal, but they can be wounded. So
yes, that was interesting too.
So I have read more of your work that has to do with Dark Goddess, which I know you have mentioned.
Yeah,
things
that's
like
a
that.
huge influence.
You talked about the influence of the. Okay, so you talked about the influence. I thought you talked about the influence of the Iliad on City of Reckoning, which is very interesting. Yeah. We got to get into that. But I was actually originally, as I was listening to this, I was going, how did the Iliad's combat with gods influence your thinking in Dark Goddess that's coming?
It didn't as much, simply because there was a bigger gap. But the thing is I had recently, but when I started writing Dark Goddess, working on that story world, I had recently like listened to a lot of Greek myths. It just wasn't the Iliad. So do I have it back there? No, I don't have the book, but I have, I listened to the audiobook, which I highly recommend, by the way, highly recommend, Mythos by Stephen Fry, I think. He wrote and did the audiobook for it. Absolutely stupendous retelling of the Greek myths. And so that was fresh on my mind, like a whole bunch of different stories. And it was from that influence specifically that that inspired the Dark Goddess world, as did reading the Ramayana, which had a really cool like battles between gods, and that's Hindu mythology, which is a whole other thing. Maybe we can talk about that on Table Talk someday, because that's a cool book. But yeah, so it wasn't Iliad. It was still Greek mythology, if that makes sense.
But these gods can be wounded. First of all, so these gods can be wounded.
They can experience pain. Yeah,
and experience pain. They're very human-like. I mean, that's what everybody says about the Greek gods. Well, they're very human and stuff like that. But I don't think it's until you've actually read this that you understand exactly how human.
Yeah.
I mean,
specifically, they can be hurt by humans. That's really,
they can be hurt by humans.
That's right. Extremely different from Abrahamic ways of thinking. Like, that is like an overconfident human being can attack a god and genuinely hurt them, and then they'll like go to Olympus crying like, oh, it's mortal.
Well, yeah. Right. Ares
they go to their father, Daddy Zeus,
what is
mortal hurt me.
I guess it's hurt here, and I gotta get
like
that up. Was one. That was another one part that like how badly Ares is portrayed in this for being the god of war. Yeah. He's not portrayed in a positive light.
Which is interesting, given this is a war story, you know?
Right. This is a war story, and yet the god of war is portrayed rather negatively, in my opinion.
What would you say about his sister, Athena? Because she's also
much more positive. See, you've got all of these gods, even though Ares' portfolio is war. Okay, he's the god of war. He doesn't have exclusive like martial prowess or anything like that. That's not like, even though he is the god of war, it's not like that's his exclusive bailiwick, because all of these gods are fighting with each other. They're waging war. Athena, I mean, also has combat within her portfolio and is so much more positively portrayed than Ares. And I think that's, go ahead.
Yeah. I wonder if it was just like, if there was some connection there, like at the time this was written, if this was like, because I don't know the answer to this. Maybe this is a known question, but like if the specific people this was written for in a specific time, if maybe the goddess Athena was super valued by the audience of this. So I wonder if that would influence it at all.
Well, I mean, maybe. I just saw Sable. There are lots of comments I know going by, but Ares was always the buffoon of the Greeks. Yeah, so he was not coming across well. But the gods, like on the other side, like taunting each other, who like both of these are on one side or the other. Poseidon comes. Even information, and I'm interested to know this. I was going to look up Edith Hamilton's mythology, but I'm not sure where it's sitting here, and I didn't have time before all of this.
Oh, I need to read that one too.
They explain. I took a mythology class, and we used that textbook, and so or that is our textbook, and I'm not sure if I still have it. If I don't have it, I need to get it, because it's got information on both Greek and Nordic mythology. Yeah. But
there's a really cool edition of that, I think, that Barnes and Noble has. I think
it's so much of what is there. I'm wondering how much is explained in the Iliad. How much because I don't know, I do not know the answer to this question, but I'm like, when we understand the relationships between the gods, how much of that do we just have from the Iliad? Like when Poseidon talks about, Poseidon comes on to help out the Greeks as the Trojans are coming to burn the ships, and Poseidon, comes, Zeus isn't having them interfere, but Poseidon comes out of the water and has a reason to come and help the Greeks. And he explains at that point, somebody says something about, Zeus is going to be upset that you're up here, dealing with this. And he explains at that point that he shouldn't be, that like, what? Well, like, I don't really care what Zeus thinks, because I am also a son of Kronos, and Zeus gets the air. That's what we decided, and then my brother Hades got the underworld, and I got the sea. But we all in common have the land, have the earth, and so I'm here, and I'm going to do what I want on the earth. He was explaining that, and I was wondering, I don't know, but I'm wondering, do we have an explanation of that predates Homer? Maybe somebody in the chat knows. I don't know. That explains that relationship.
That's a scholarly question right there. Yeah.
Or does our understanding of the relationship of those gods actually come from the Iliad? I don't know, but it's right there. That explained that.
Yeah, that's a really cool question about like how much of Greek mythology and Greek culture do we know today, specifically because of this text? Like how much of that is not corroborated in other text? I don't know. That's a cool thought. We have to ask a classicist.
We'll have to ask a classicist. Maybe we can have one on.
That would be fun.
I would be fascinated. People are talking about, I see in the comments, people are talking about the relationship between Ares. Like Sable says, honestly, I've always thought that calling Ares the god of war is inaccurate. Athena is the goddess of war. Ares is the god of violence.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, that's cool.
It could be. Yeah. Nicole even says Athena is all about warfare strategy.
Because she's more of the intellectual wisdom side of war. And that makes sense, because he's more of the passion of it. I think that distinction makes sense. Another note on that. Oh, sorry.
I was just saying. I was gonna say I see a lot of comments going by about all this. Is fantastic. I'm watching the comments. Go ahead, Brent.
Okay, bring any of them up that you want. I tend to not have them so I can see them because it distracts me. So
I know.
I'll leave that to you. That's hard for me to multitask, I suppose. What was I going to say? Oh, a side note, a sort of an interesting, I guess, gender-related side note. What was the first goddess that got hurt? She was I'm forgetting her name, but she's the goddess of love. What's her name? I know who it is. I just can't remember her name right now. Wait, I know I wrote it down. What is her name?
I want to talk about this too.
Because there was a really interesting moment there. That
Eros. Google.
Oh God. Who was that? Aphrodite.
Aphrodite. Yes, thank you. Aphrodite. Thank you.
Yeah.
Pseudo history came about. Thank you. Aphrodite.
So Aphrodite, the only reason she was there was because, yet again, she had a son that was on the battlefield and she was trying to protect him. But she's not, she's the goddess of love. She's not really meant for battle.
Right,
but
that was my point. She's still out there though. Like
she was out there, but she was the first one and it was one of the, I can't remember who was it. Was it Athena that goaded one of the mortals to go? What was his name? Diomed? I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right. She goaded him.
Diomedes. I want to talk about him.
Diomedes. That's interesting. It was written differently in mine. To say I hate my translate. I don't. Whatever. I wish I had. I used to have a really good edition. I say these a lot because I had a house fire and I lost a lot of cool stuff. But I haven't replaced that. I need to rebuy my cool home edition of Homer. But yeah. So she was like encouraging him. If you see a god on the battlefield, attack them. Basically. Were you about to say something?
I'll say it in a moment. Go ahead.
Okay. And so, he was successful. He basically speared her hand and she goes to, she goes to the place of the gods. I don't know why I just forgot what it's called.
Mount Olympus.
Mount Olympus. Thank you. And then and Zeus and the other gods are kind of making fun of her. I think Athena comes up and he's like, "Oh, what happened to you?" And Zeus is kind of like you're not for the battlefield. You should leave that to Ares and Athena. And so
but Ares had just gotten wounded after that.
Yeah, but then Ares, that's right. It's just kind of funny that Ares then
that was
comes
the same battle.
The same battle. But that was an interesting note because it was not you leave this to the men, leave this to the male gods. It was leave this to Ares and Athena. So it was clearly the fact that she specifically was not meant to fight, not that it didn't have to do with the fact that she was a female goddess,
right?
Which was fascinating to me because you hear that kind of a phrase often. It's said that way, right? Oh, leave the fighting to the men. It was leave the fighting to the war gods,
right? Yeah, because I was paying attention. Okay, we're just going in theme of in flow of conversation here when we come back to, but I think there's something to talk about because that's so prevalent in today's society, the relationship between men and women and whatever, and what is shown here from the perspective of the gods. Mm-hmm. It seems very positive.
Yeah, it's different. It does feel like the gods have a different gender dynamics than the humans do, which is pretty interesting.
They do. Mm-hmm. They absolutely do, because you can completely call from the human perspective. Like we opened this story, and a significant part of the story is generally about the what do you want to call them, war brides or something that are taken by the human
that was
hero.
Disturbing, to be honest. Like they're fighting over who gets to have which woman to rape. Like that's what
has been taken from the and so the difference between that dynamic between the men and women of the mortals,
right,
versus the dynamic between the gods is very interesting because it is very different.
Yeah, I thought about that a lot. And I wonder what that says about how the Greeks thought about these kinds of things. Like, why would they create, these stories of these gods that are very similar to humans in many ways? I guess they're kind of an elevated, in some ways, versions of humans, but yet they have a very different gender dynamic. So I don't know. I don't know what that, because you couldn't say that it's like we've we've forgotten, or like we have a misunderstanding of what the gender dynamic was for the Greeks. Like it in the stories, you can see the difference between, you know, the humans in the story and the gods in the story. So I don't know what to take from that. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure either, because it's not something. It's clear. It seems to me clear a human divine sort of divide in this dynamic. Because I never saw anything with the gods. If you got Athena is all over the place, can do amazing things. Like the mother of Achilles, you know, she's active. She's doing there's all kinds of roles for women, but they are largely all divine. They're largely all the gods. The female gods are taking that role. There is, you mentioned the war brides of the heroes early on that have this. Then now there is,
and the whole thing is over Helen being kidnapped too. So it's like
there is the whole thing over Helen being kidnapped, right? So the whole thing is about Helen being kidnapped. And then depending on what kind of story, whether or not she had been made to fall in love with Paris or whatever, but we're all there. So, and before I go on to that, but there is also the extremely touching and to me very interesting scene where Hector is with his wife, you know, his with his wife and his child. And he's really the only one that, is portrayed in family life. You know, he has this, of course, I loved Hector. I love, of course, on the Trojan side, Hector was really carrying it. I mean, he's if you're
the
a
hero
Trojan,
on the side. Yeah.
Well, right, but there are lots of heroes on the Greek side.
True, but if you have to choose one,
on the Trojan side, you're either Hector or Aeneas or no one. Which I actually really did like Aeneas. I really loved Hector.
Heath, you need to read one of your next things has got to be the Aeneid. You got to read
it's going to be. No, it's going to be. It's going to be. Right, yeah. So the
Aeneid
is going to be on that too. Because I did really like Aeneas, because it's him and Hector basically on the Trojan side. And and Aeneas is like, okay, well, this is going badly. So he's gonna be like, okay, I guess I'll go found Rome. Okay, all right. I mean, Hector and I did everything we could. We did everything we could. But it's but he gets that. So no, I was talking about Hector getting that the scene, the very interesting scene with his wife and his children, and then
please remind me what happens in it, because that's the one that I didn't.
Well, he's talking. He talks to his wife about that. Then later, his wife is preparing a bath for him because he likes to bathe after he comes in from war. Hector is saying, but then
don't blame him for that.
She's saying that his son's nursemaid comes in. So his wife comes in, and then the scene where he goes to hold his son before he goes out to battle again. And the son is afraid because of the visage of his helmet and its horsehair. And he won't go to him because he's still wearing his helmet. And he takes off his helmet so that his son can see his father, and he holds him for the last time.
Damn.
And that was the only scene like that, and in fact, that kind of reminded me in a certain way of when you were doing Band of Brothers. Band of Brothers was all battle, it only dealt with the battle. But then when you went to the one about the Pacific, what was that called? The chat will know. They showed them outside of battle too, and that kind of that scene kind of reminded me. I don't think Pan was in the Iliad. I'm seeing pseudo history ask, but that was so that also showed them not off the battlefield. But Hector was the only one who got that.
Yeah, because he's the one the one that I feel like we like the most on the Trojan side, and he dies, and his death is really important from the narrative perspective, and so. I think that it makes sense that we would give that to him of all people, but that leads me to another topic. There's something else I wanted to say on that, though. I'm trying to remember what it was. Maybe I'll come back to it. I guess I'll come back to that. I'm sure I have it written down. But one of the things that is really intriguing about this story is that there isn't a single hero. I don't think. I would be curious to see if you agree with this, because it doesn't seem to me like there is. Because that's something that we typically have in modern storytelling. That's pretty typical of all storytelling, is to have one singular hero that you're rooting for that's driving the story. But it seems like a very, very fitting to this kind of a war story where you have multiple heroes, and importantly on both sides of the war. I think you root for the Argives more than you root for the Trojans, but only barely. There's a lot of characters here that you come to respect and identify with, and they're all very humanized, and it just adds this element of you can feel the cost of this kind of a war, because it's not just like, oh, this side's all the good guys, this side's all the bad guys. Like, we're seeing all the people that are involved. I don't know, what thoughts did you have on that?
On whether which one you're pulling for?
Yeah, if there's like a singular hero, or if there's multiple.
So I guess that kind of goes into its structure. Okay, so people say, okay, so what is this about? On the immaterial level, it's about dealing, and this is like something everybody says, but on the immaterial level about this story is about dealing with rage.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the first words.
Right, which is the first word, and then we end with the funeral of Hector, which Achilles ends up allowing. So yes, okay, so Achilles is it, but he is out of this for so long. I mean, he is out of this for a long time.
He feels like he's the main character, but he's not there for most of it.
He's not there for so long.
Yeah.
So much of this is a recounting of all this. I mean, you're waiting for Achilles to get in battle. I mean, you're
just waiting for him to come back.
Man, Achilles does just carve a bloody swath when he's and with the armor that's forged by Hephaestus, and I mean, he just goes through everybody to this. We can talk about that, but you're waiting for him to, but that's I saw in some of the analysis that I was watching after this, trying to map like the call to adventure onto this.
I don't know if that kind of a thing fits for the story, though.
And okay, but but I felt like the most stuff that was most valid was the most general. Like, okay, first third, the middle, the climax. The very general kinds of stuff. Because I don't know. Now, I could change my mind if I do a deeper dive into all of this. But when I'm watching, with all of or when I'm listening to the Iliad with all of the information that we have accumulated, a knowledge we've accumulated by going through something like the hero's journey or something like that. I mean, we're not seeing that in Achilles. I mean, this isn't
a hero's journey story. I just think it's fundamentally isn't.
We're looking at something different. This is Lou. Lou says there is an older story structure, which I started with. And you see in Samson, maybe one day we can talk about Samson too. We're doing the
I'd love to.
There's so much stuff to talk about. This is Lou's words, Lou Anders. Lou says there's an older story structure where the hero does stuff, and then he dies. And there is your, and he talks about that with regard to something like, Samson from the Bible, or, so, Achilles and Hercules.
Feel like Samson's story is more, I would give it more depth than that, but we'll come to that later.
Achilles, but Hercules, they do stuff until they die. So
but there's a thread. There's a thread. There's usually a thematic thread that between.
Well, there can be a thematic thread. Yes.
Yeah.
But because often the reason they die has to do with their character flaw. That comes up. I'm not saying there isn't some kind of theme that comes up, but so this, if you're just as basic as beginning, middle, end, okay, then we've got that. And it does, and I would say that he's definitely tying this into what do you do with rage, like and the difference, that we have this conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon, and so Achilles decides, okay, I'm just not doing anything, which nearly
good luck, everybody.
Okay, so good luck then, right? Yes, exactly.
I love that his revenge is his own absence, like because that first fight between them is so much a fight of like pride and honor. Like neither of them can give up, can concede to the other, because it would be like damaging to their their image, and so for his punishment to them is to retract himself to show just how much he's valuable. It's like
to show how much he's valuable, right. And he even
my honor by not but just ignoring you for a little while. Good luck
right.
on
All
your
right, right. So they're like, I'm going to show you just how valuable I am by sitting over here in my hut for a long time. All of my guys.
I love the detail of like his because it's not just him, it's him and all of the people following him, all these ships.
And the Myrmidons.
And there's a detail that like as everyone else is fighting in war, his people are just like practicing throwing darts and like trying to see if they can hit a target. And so they're just like playing games on the beach. Like
I mean, well, all of that rage of war is going on, and like Hector is coming over the walls and stuff like that.
All this intensity and death and blood, and they're just like, "Oh, I got a bullseye."
But
yeah,
I forget where I was going for that. But yeah, so but not only does he not engage, but he prays that the Trojans will be successful.
Yes.
He's like, all right, I'm gonna do that, and I'm praying that these Trojans are going to whip up on all these Greeks to show Agamemnon what this is all about.
Yeah, that's some audacity right there, and he's correct that it works. That like the gods listen to him. They specifically ignore Agamemnon. Well, I say the gods. I guess it's primarily Zeus.
Well, yeah, it was right. Yeah. It's Achilles' mother, like through
Achilles' mother,
that intercessory prayer. Achilles' mother takes the prayer to Zeus,
right?
And then Zeus, then is gonna do it, right? Like my understanding is like,
don't tell my wife. He's like, don't tell Hera.
Right, don't tell my wife. Right.
But Hera's too smart for that. She finds out. She can tell. She's like, husband, have you been scheming? I don't know what you mean. I love their dynamic is hilarious to me, and that actually is an influence in my Dark Goddess world. But anyway, it's the main god and goddess in that world, like they're completely based off of Zeus and Hera, like basically the same personalities and everything. Almost.
I just had this brief note here, but it goes back to our idea about the closeness between the men and gods.
Mm-hmm.
I was struck by the number of times that the gods are referred to as the son of some other god, especially Zeus, who is very frequently called the son of Kronos.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the gods also have, their family lines, and that is extremely present. I mean, I'd be interested to know how many times that Zeus is called son of Kronos, or just the son of Kronos.
Well, you could say the cultural equivalent is like to call someone by their last name. Like it's like a little bit more formal, the son of Kronos, right?
Right. There's formality in that, but that's also giving the same formality in the same way to humans and gods. That how would you formally refer to Zeus, like the ultimate god? That he is the son of some other god.
Some other god that he has buried deep beneath the earth.
Right. Yeah.
Currently in chains.
Yes. Yeah. So I was surprised by that, the number.
On that note, sorry, you go first.
No, go ahead. No, you go first.
I was just going to make a side note. I love that there was a moment, and this is another Dark Goddess influence. It's funny because like nobody in the chat knows anything about this Dark Goddess story. Hopefully one day you will. But the threat, because the gods are immortal, they can be hurt but they can't die, and so there was a threat that I think it was Zeus made to Ares at one point, where he was like, "Get yourself together, or else I'm gonna put you deeper than Kronos." I think he said Kronos. It was basically like I can't kill you, but I can trap you and bury you, which is like one of the worst things you can do to a god that can't die.
Oh,
yes. You see the influence?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Yes.
One thing that I really want to know more about, because this seems like it has come up quite a bit. It came up in Dominion as I was reading it. It comes up in The Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield. It came up here is Apollo. Apollo, talking about also we're talking about not having Ares having exclusive dominion over war, even though he's god of war. We just had that whole discussion, but whatever.
Right.
But I mean, Apollo is definitely a warrior. I mean, one of the opening scenes is him using these plague arrows to decimate the Greeks, because
kind of a hunter warrior. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, hunter warrior.
Because he and his sister Artemis are very much play off of each other, kind of in the way that Ares and Athena do.
Yeah, and so actually, one of the things that I want to know is I just in future study is more about the cult of Apollo.
Yeah.
Because okay, Apollo. So Apollo as son of Zeus, right?
Right. There's a lot of son of Zeus's.
I mean, there are a lot of son of Zeus's.
I put the plural in the wrong spot there.
Right. But like, what does it mean? To this is kind of a question posed in Dominion. But like, what does it mean to be the son of a god?
Oh yeah, which is cool to think about in the context of with Christianity starting, because it was very much, there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. The text of, did they mean that in a Greek sense to be the son, to call him the son of God? Did they mean that in a, in a Jewish sense? Like that term son of God was a really common one in the ancient world. And yeah, that's definitely relevant.
So what do you expect to happen if you are a son of a god? Like, what are you like if you are the son of God or a son of God?
Let's see what. You go first.
Well, I was gonna say that difference, like, it seems like he was often in Dominion contrasting Christ to Apollo. Like that Apollo would, and that's why I want to know more about Apollo and his cult, because it seems like very popular, and it comes up a lot. That what is it that what is does Apollo archetypically represent son of God?
Well,
I mean, because obviously Zeus does, because he's son of Kronos. But I'm talking about like in our history, like who are you like? If you're talking about, okay, what kinds of things does the son of a god do?
Well, I think usually that's a human. That's usually son of God is the same thing as demigod, which does not imply that you're divine, which is one of the things that the confusion in early Christianity, because they debated that, right? Because I think that's another way of saying a demigod. It's a way of saying you have a special connection with gods. You're part of that family lineage, and you will have special powers. You'll have some sort of supernatural power, and usually you have some sort of really special birth. All these things we see in the original writings about Jesus, by the way. But yes, there's some sort of story about your birth that's going to be really cool and epic. And yeah,
Wikipedia says that Apollo is the son of Zeus. Just looking right, just drew. But I'm talking about, okay, yeah, I know there are lots of them, because I mean you could also compare Hercules to Christ. But what I'm saying is, in the world of the first century, in the Roman world, what was the most prominent cult dedicated to the Son of God? I don't know, it might have been Apollo.
But I think that phrase, what I'm saying is, I don't think that phrase applied to a god. I could be wrong. But I think that phrase was specifically applied to humans that had a divine lineage, I think. So I don't think Apollo would have been called a son of God. He's just a god that's the son of another god. Do you know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, then take Hercules. Okay, fine. Let's take Hercules.
Yeah.
What does the son of a god do? Let's look at ancient Greek mythology. Hercules. Okay, what does the son of a god do according to first century emergent Christianity but Jewish thought? Christ. Those are very different things.
Are they? Just depends on which Christians you were talking to. But yes, that very much depended on which group of Christians in the first century you were talking to, because this was like their big thing they debated for the first like 300 years. What does it mean that he's the son of God?
That you think, I'm just saying that when I read the story of the gospel about what does Jesus do during his life, those are very, very different stories than the stories I read about Hercules, and it's very, very different than the stories I read about Apollo. So if you're saying, okay, you said you rejected my comparison of Apollo, okay, fine. So
not completely rejected.
Let's just say Hercules. What is it that a son of a god would be able to do? Greek mythology is telling you a very different story when they tell you the story of Hercules, with all of these great accomplishments that Hercules is able to do. That's very different from dying on a cross as a slave's death.
Well, that was them trying to make sense of the fact that their leader had died. But before that, we have all these other stories that do make him seem more son of God-ish, right? Like he's performing these miracles, he's bringing people back to life. There are, of course, two different accounts of a miraculous birth. So there is
an miraculous birth. There is
Huh?
You could argue there is apotheosis in the end, both Hercules and Christ.
Remind me what
ascended.
apotheosis means. I forget what that word
To
means.
become a god. Apotheosis is
Oh,
process by which
right.
a mortal becomes a god. So if you're going by more the human nature of Christ,
Great word.
Ascend. I know. I love the word
in my
apotheosis.
writing.
And I really wish that we had an equivalent word. Maybe the chat knows, but I have always been looking for the equivalent word for a human who becomes a demon. If apotheosis is a human who becomes a god, what is the equivalent of like a human who becomes a demon? But you end up with the apotheosis. So yeah, okay. So there's some, but you know,
it is different. I think there's the similarities are there, and I think that would have been recognized to like Greek and Roman audiences at the time the Gospels were being spread. But you're right that it's different. I think the differences were important too, because you would have associated a son of a god usually as being some sort of a warrior, some sort of an adventurer.
Right? Yes.
But I think the fact that Jesus wasn't was probably that was important though, because he was a different kind of, he was a savior. He was someone different. So I think that the fact that was different probably stood out on purpose.
I know. I'm saying, if you say, hey, 8-year-old Heath, I'm going to tell you a story about a son of a god. Would you like to listen to these stories about Hercules or these stories about Jesus walking around Galilee? It's Hercules. It's Hercules. I mean, Hercules is doing all kinds of things that no mortal human can do with his 12 labors and all of that. He's doing things that Jesus doesn't do.
Side note, by the way, if we're talking about, not just the phrase son of God, but if we're just speaking about character archetypes, I think the closest equivalent in the Bible is Samson. Samson has the demigod archetype. But it's different because we're in different cultures, so what's valued is different. Obviously in Israel or in Judea at the time, there wasn't a concept that like God was reproducing and having children. So there wouldn't have been that way to explain the character. Instead, it was the thing that they valued, which was following the rules. You got to follow these laws really, really well, and that makes you moral. So that's what their supernatural, powerful, warrior archetype character did. Is he was just really good at following these rules, and that was his downfall too, was that he didn't follow the rules. So I thought that was a really interesting, because I reread that story recently. I was like, this is Hercules for a Jewish audience,
right?
Like for ancient Jewish audience, like that was. But it's the same character archetype, but the supernatural magic stuff is explained very differently because of different cultural values.
And twice I have tried to write the story of Samson, and twice my computer has deleted my story. I looked deliberately the other day. I was like, wait a minute. I was writing the story of Samson, because I remember I had a complete computer catastrophe years ago when that was really significant, and it wiped one of the things was my Samson story. And I was to do it again. I completely started, and so I might have to tackle Samson again.
Well, maybe there's some Greek god that doesn't want you to write that story for some reason.
Maybe.
And they're just stopping you each time. So I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't go against the gods.
But yes, Samson is on. So my point was that I want to know that I want to know more about Apollo. I want to know more about Apollo. I was thinking this is effectively, I love in-universe texts in fantasy. I write them. This is an in-universe text. It's kind of ways. It's like an in-universe text of the Greeks and explaining, like in a world where all these gods are real. This is your in-universe text. I don't know if that's important or not, but I was thinking about that.
What do you mean? I'm not sure I'm following. Explain it another way.
Well, I could tell the, and when you're talking about writing like an in-universe text in a fantasy world. Like what does that mean? That the text itself is part of the world,
right?
I feel like this is Homer trying to tell you, like, from the perspective of this is my universe, this is what happened here.
Gotcha.
And so it's much different than somebody else relating, here's what the Greek gods are or whatever. Like this is in my universe. This is what happened here. And I was trying to think, why is this being told? My question from that was like, why is this being told? Okay, this is some kind of morality about the rage of Achilles, but it's also documentation about all of these people, like we had talked before, that don't matter quite so much to us now, all of their little stories or this person showing up or something, but it's also a documentation of their mythological genealogy. In a sense, all these people, I thought we talked about Hercules. One of the funny parts of this that I thought was that, like, this is the Trojan War. This is where everyone is supposed to be. Like, everyone who is anybody, like all of the Greeks, are here, and the Trojans are here, and all of the Trojan allies are here. So I mean, like, everybody in this world is here in this war and is fighting this.
Gotta be there or be square.
Except for the sons of Hercules. Like, I thought that part was funny because, okay, Hercules is not in this because Hercules was prior to this. I mean, Hercules had done his thing and become a god before the story. But Hercules doesn't feature as a god, interestingly. So Hercules does not show up as a god after achieving apotheosis. He does not show up as a god in the story, even though that had happened earlier. But then also his sons, it says something like, I was looking for this, I couldn't find it, but it says something like, in the recounting of all the ships that are here, he does say something like briefly, but the sons of Hercules are not here because they had something else to do in Rhodes. So Hercules, so the only
I wonder if that's supposed to be a diss or something. Like,
I know, I wonder
they
about
didn't
that,
come.
because he's not mentioned other than to say, well, his sons and their ships, they had something else to do in Rhodes. I don't know what that was. But we're
not even going to say what it is. It
mentions they're not going to be in this story. So I thought that was I don't know what that was about. But it was interesting that he is mentioned
there that we're missing.
Specifically that he's the only person that I remember who was mentioned. His kids are not here. They have nothing else to do. So
that sounds like sarcasm or something, like I wonder if there's something there that we're missing. It's
and it's Hercules. So James Bacon for $10. Thank you very much, James. James says, Candace, an Egyptologist, says Christianity has very little to do with the Greco-Roman tradition. It has many more analogs with the Near Eastern cult of El, ancient Egypt, which borrows heavily from both the myth and symbolism, especially the dying and resurrection.
I would strongly disagree with that, to be honest, because Christianity started, its very early origins were in Judea, but then as it formed over the next century, and certainly the next 3 centuries, it was heavily, it spread because of the Romans and the Greeks. It became very deeply influenced.
Well, I don't think that. I think he's talking about the origin here.
Okay.
The origin with the cult
he says
of
Christianity has very little to do with the great Greco-Roman tradition. That's phraseology.
Okay, I think that's right, because he goes on to because he says it has more analogs. I think this is talking about because that's what I took that is, like the myth of Osiris and the myth of Jesus, those kinds of things, rather than what came later. I think, if that was the understanding, let us know.
That's fair. If you're saying, clarify for us, Sable.
Yeah, because the Hebrews had spent generations in Egypt, so we might be coming out of this.
I mean, this is all Mediterranean culture, so they're certainly all influencing each other quite a lot, or loosely Mediterranean. But I would say as Christianity developed, it became very, very heavily influenced by Greco-Roman thought. But its origins, so it is very unique in that way, because its origins are not there. Its origins are not Greco-Roman. They're quite different. So it's kind of an interesting hybrid, because it takes some things from Greco-Roman thought, but not others. And there are some things that it keeps from Jewishness and not others. So it definitely, I think it became, the reason it was able to spread was because of its Greco-Roman influence. That made it more understandable to a broader Roman world. And that concept of the Son of God, I think, was one of the things that helped with that, because that was a concept that the Roman world understood. People like that understood that kind of a paradigm. This person was a son of a god, and so he has powers. Okay, I get it. That was an archetype they were familiar with.
When we were talking about, I'm just going through, I'm looking down through my notes here. When we were talking about armor and stuff like that earlier on, that not only does this make me wonder how much this influenced, this was our foundational information on some of Greek mythology, but I also wonder how much of this was some of our foundational influence on our understanding of armor and military equipment of the period.
I don't know the answer to that either.
And I don't know the answer to that either, but I mean, he talks about some very specific things, in this and goes, like we're talking about this. And so I was like, okay, well, if you are a historian scholar of this particular time period, and you're trying to understand arms and armor from this world, how much is influenced by archaeological discovery? Can you even find archaeological discoveries of the kind of equipment they were wearing, at this particular time? And how much were you actually relying on the descriptions of Homer? A sword turned around by a crossed belt, for the, on their chest from the shield strap and then the baldric of their sword. A number of times, weapons are turned away by loin guards.
They described
And so I'm wondering, if you were like, okay, let's come up with a text about the military equipment of this particular period, are those texts heavily reliant upon Homer's description? So is this historical understanding, like how much, like when I'm reading even like what's even become like a D&D book on the subject or something like that, I wonder now, and because I don't know the answer, but I do wonder, especially in say 1930s to 70s, if a scholar is saying, what type of armor did ancient Greek of this period wear, how much of that would actually be influenced by what is written by Homer?
That if you have that combination of things that are written and then images on like pots and stuff like that, combined with archaeological evidence, I bet that together really would paint a full picture. It's like you're describing it, but then we also have images like that show us maybe what some of these things look like, but those things are not as detailed.
But we have to know what if you've got, so James Bacon's talking about the grave of Alexander's father. I'm not sure when that was discovered, but right, so you do have some of that with the findings of his tomb, but but you've got concerns about the actual physical discovery is most significant, right? So the actual physical discovery is most significant, because even if Homer was not writing at this time, writing at the time the Trojan War happened, his understanding of Trojan War armor might be descriptions of armor at his own time.
True.
Or if somebody's making a pot about the Trojan War, but it's in 200 BC, they might be showing, 200 BC armor. They do that in the Middle Ages all the time.
I was about to say, you see that in the Middle Ages a lot.
Yeah, you will see depictions of David and Goliath, 14th century depictions of David and Goliath, and they're wearing 14th century armor from Europe in this battle. And so that's not telling you.
And they look like Europeans too. You're like, okay. While we're talking about armor, I feel like I should show people up close these earrings I'm wearing.
I was actually wondering what your earrings were.
Look at this.
Here, I'll solo you. Hang on, I'm solo you.
Look at these guys.
Oh.
The kind of bronze-ish. That's why I chose them, because I think we're in the Bronze Age. Anyway.
Lots of bronze.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a Bronze Age style weapon. It looks more medieval, but anyway, I thought everyone should see that. That was a gift, by the way, that someone bought me, this very well understanding my style. I was like, well, hell yeah. Let's see if I can put this back on.
Sort of quasi comedic thing that I noted is when you're talking about the R-rated nature and the number of, like, the description of battle wounds and things like this, the number of times the location of a wound is described in relation to the nipple. Very large. It's very large.
I wonder if that's like a comedic because of different cultural associations too. Like maybe that wouldn't have been funny to them. But
I know it might not have been funny to them.
We don't really talk about nipples that much.
The number of times
Yeah.
he brought up some location of a sword strike or spear strike to where this man's nipple was. So comedic here, but not necessarily comedic there. That like this,
No.
choose a part of the body to describe where this wound was. Well, the nipple will be my frame of reference. Like this.
And I guess it kind of makes sense because a lot of, that's like where a lot of vital stuff is. So you would want to be aiming towards the heart or the lungs or whatever. And so your nipples are there too. I guess that's helpful, but I don't know.
Okay, so why? I mean, I think this is a very interesting question. Some people on YouTube talk about it. Why don't we talk about Diomedes more?
Oh, which one was Diomedes? I'm forgetting.
So Diomedes is the one who is able to injure the gods. And then
for some reason it was spelled Diomed. My translation sucks. I should get a different physical copy to finish reading it.
I was very glad that the one that I listened to was Fitzgerald. So I listened to the Fitzgerald. Okay. I got this previously I had gotten this to read, and this is the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's very nice. Yeah. But when I opened it up, I realized that one of the differences was this was the Roman version. And so
now I realize that's important to me.
Yeah.
Why would you do the Roman version?
This one right here, which I have not read, but that was translated by Samuel Butler. This is the Butler translation.
Let me look and see which one mine is, because I was reading it as an ebook. Let me open up my Kindle real quick.
Because I was so glad that I read it. And in fact, that was actually one of the reasons that I stopped reading the Odyssey, is because I had a translation where they were suddenly talking about the Rome,
this is Samuel Butler, the one that I got as an ebook.
So you listened to Samuel Butler. So yes.
Well, I was reading it, but yes. Yes.
Yeah,
so
or read it. Yes.
Okay. So I do not like Samuel Butler.
Fitzgerald. I read or listened to Fitzgerald.
I'm going to look up the one that I read before, because I loved the first one that I read. Give me a moment. You talk first while I look this up.
Well, so I want to make sure that I get a copy or listen to a copy of the Odyssey that also uses all of the Greek. I don't know. Why would you do that? Why would you translate this and use Roman? I don't know.
I know. It's a Greek story.
Why would you do that? I don't know. It must be because it might be because the translator thought that it would have been more knowledgeable to the people at its time. Maybe they were more familiar with Roman. I don't know. But no, Diomedes, I wanted to talk to you about Diomedes because I feel like Diomedes' influence on Western society, shall we say, is almost non-existent.
Which is intriguing. Yes.
Right. And so why that is from a story perspective. I mean, Achilles is all like, I would say my knowledge of Achilles, I understood Achilles culturally. You're talking about Achilles' heel. Great. What do you know about Achilles generally from, just I guess absorbing it as part of Western culture. Great Greek hero. Trojan, fought in the Trojan War. Achilles' heel, died by a shot in the heel. Okay, I guess that's what everybody knows about Achilles. After you read the Iliad, you really get an understanding of how badass this guy is. And there are a lot of badasses in this story. But, as far as heaping up the corpses, great Greek hero doesn't even communicate what we are talking about when Achilles goes to war. But neither do, but very similarly. There are a lot of people like on the Greek side, they're like, who are fantastic. And I want to talk specifically about Patroclus in a bit. Let me make note of that. But oh my God, Diomedes, this was a character that I had never even heard of. And this guy is super cool. He is completely badass to the point of wounding both of those gods, not least of which is the god of war, which sends him off to heaven and Mount Olympus to go complain.
Imagine wounding the god of war. Like, imagine what that would do to your ego.
And it was only Apollo. Like, I think was it Apollo who comes to Diomedes? It was another one of the gods that after he had wounded Ares, Diomedes comes or is addressed by one of the other gods, and I think it might have been Apollo. If I got that right, the chat will know. And it's like, and the god's like, hey, you really need to cool it and don't need to be so like uppity against the immortals. Otherwise, we're really gonna tear into you or something like that. And he's like, oh, okay. So, like, okay. And then he has to kind of, it is Apollo. Okay. Daniel says that it is Apollo. So, I mean, this guy is the ultimate hero. He's become one of my favorite characters. And I love Achilles even more after having read this. I mean, I love Achilles.
I have the answer. Sorry.
Okay. Go ahead.
You said Samuel Butler was the one you've been listening to that you enjoyed, right?
Yeah. No. Fitzgerald. No. Fitzgerald is the one that I loved.
Wait, Samuel Butler was the one we didn't like?
No, Butler is the book that I have here. And I said, when I started looking at the book, it was Roman.
Fascinating. So apparently the first one I read, it took me a lot to find this. I think the version I read before is out of print now. But that looks like that was Samuel Butler, which is fascinating. It was long enough ago that I guess I didn't recognize the difference. But I will be looking specifically for, which is the one that we said to look for? I forgot already.
Fitzgerald. This is like, it was like a 1926. I specifically wanted this one because it's like a 1920s translation. It might be 1926. This Butler. No, excuse me. This Fitzgerald. It's Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald, 1920 something. I wanted that because I wanted specifically something that I thought was not going to be modern in sound. Because I mean we're only talking about 1926 here, but I was trying to not do like a 1980 translation or something like that. I wanted earlier, and I didn't think much beyond that, but I picked that as the one. I noticed that Ian Holm has a audio book of the Odyssey. I sure hope that it's a Greek one because I might listen to it because oh my God, Ian Holm, I'm going to listen to that. He's the narrator. But but Diomedes. So back to the awesomeness that is Diomedes, right? So
he didn't get punished for that, did he? Because I don't remember. I didn't reread.
No, he didn't get punished for it. I mean, he didn't get called out. Apollo kind of calls him out and be like, "Hey, dude!"
Because usually in Greek myths, if a mortal behaves like that, there are consequences. But he doesn't have any consequences apparently. Arachne is is that how you say her name? She's a famous example of that. She's like, oh, I could sew better than the gods. Where the god just comes and is like, oh, could you now? I'm turning you into a spider. But
and he goes and he does all kinds of stuff during this war. I mean, he's rallying these people over there. I mean, when Achilles is not present, Diomedes is really carrying the Greek side. So like I said, I've only fallen more in love with Achilles and understand, especially the Greek armored Achilles. Diomedes, I've discovered a new favorite character. Love Hector and Aeneas. But my question was, and this from the story structure perspective, why I want to talk to you about this. Like, why is Diomedes almost completely absent in Western thought?
He sure does not fit into modern day. Or he sure does not fit into the later, attitudes that people had towards the divine. So be definitely contrast. So maybe that's why, because that's someone who literally defied and fought against the gods and got away with it.
Well, so he is. So I'd be interested. Maybe the chat has something to say. I was going to say how he dies here. Diomedes. I mean, he
does die in the Iliad, just not because of that.
No,
because it felt like they were warning that. They were saying
no, I don't think he died. I was looking up how he died. No, he doesn't die there. It says that he is regarded alongside Ajax the Great. There are two Ajaxes. Agamemnon and Achilles as the best warriors of all the Greeks. Subsequently, Diomedes founds 10 or more Italian cities, and after his death, was worshipped as a divine being under. I didn't know. I don't think he died.
Fascinating.
I thought that where you were going to go and where I was going is that I was thinking that we have basically an example that Diomedes is there basically to give us an example of perfection. Like in a certain sense, I mean, Diomedes, he takes the field when Achilles cannot. He defends or refuses to. When Achilles refuses to take the field, Diomedes is there on the Greek side. He defends people. He goes and does the challenges and challenges the right people. He will even go off and drive off the gods. he does everything that is asked for him in heroic ways, but what he doesn't seem to have is the flaw. And we remember Achilles for the flaw and what he's overcoming, his rage, that he overcomes this and things like this. So I wonder if this is, perhaps like, why didn't Homer make Diomedes the main character of the Iliad? Like, I got to tell the story of this war. It seems like it'd be really easy, or this section of the war, this section, it seems like it'd be very easy to make Diomedes the main character because he's the one who is just amazing. But yet the main character, such as we have it, like we're talking about, is focused on a flawed character and the overcoming of a flaw.
Yep. That's a good, interesting insight.
Yeah. So it seems like, when Lou Anders is talking about the bad example in characters in stories, that we got our protagonist and we're looking at a main character. The main character in relation to a flawed, wait a minute, let me say that again. In relationship to a bad example for what they could become. Luke could become Darth Vader, as a bad example of what happens if you're a Jedi and you fall. Luke is looking at Darth Vader in Casablanca. Rick is looking at the owner, I forget his name, but looking at the owner of the other. So you've got this flaw. But in this case, I think we have a good example.
That's fascinating.
Like, what should Achilles actually be doing? Achilles should, in that section where he's absent, where one of the YouTube channels was talking about Achilles always being wrapped up in his blanket burrito of despair,
yeah,
and they always illustrate him as a cartoon, like Achilles in a blanket wrapped up in his I'm sitting out this battle.
They took what is her name, Briseis or whatever, Briseis.
Yeah, the woman he's with, yes. But in those cases, Diomedes is really showing what he could do, what he should be doing. Now, of course, Ulysses is also out there. Ulysses is also great. That's great. But Diomedes is really out there, fighting gods. So it seemed to me that Diomedes is the good example of what Achilles should have been doing during those times. And that Achilles becomes Diomedes becomes less important once Achilles takes the field.
Am I allowed to make another? Oh,
sure.
I was going to say, am I allowed to make another brief comment about Dark Goddess?
Oh, sure, go for it.
Because I have a good example character in there. So briefly for people who don't know, which is everybody, the story has a character who corrupts. But at the very beginning, because of power, at the very beginning, we see a character who is in power and is not corrupted. We have a good king character at the very beginning of the story. If you remember, there's a good king. The good king dies. Spoiler alert. And then in the end of the story, we have an evil king. And that's showing who she could become and who she should be. Anyway. So I feel like there is potential for that in a story. But they're not going to be the protagonist. They're going to be, like someone off to the side. That's a really fascinating thought that you have there, Heath.
Yeah, I don't know how often we see the good example, but that may be an example of a situation where, okay, that person, that kind of character isn't as memorable, even though they are really cool. Now, not Diomedes, not diabetes. This is Diomedes, the character here.
Thanks, Bacon.
Yeah, so I'm going to think more about that because I do. I really I need what I was going to say is that regarding this, and maybe this is something we need to do as part of the Geekverse in the Lord of the Rings, which we've got to get to an analysis of. I am a huge fan of Prince Imrahil. I want you to start the Prince Imrahil fan club, which is sadly a character who was dropped from the movies. But Prince Imrahil is also, oh my God. Come to think of it, these are both examples of both of these are great examples of good example characters. Prince Imrahil in the Lord of the Rings is a good example character. I mean, he is our heroic knightly prince, and I love that character. And I was going to say that for the Iliad, also in the Geekverse, I'll set up like a PO box for the Prince Imrahil fan club over here, so we can send out whatever. And then over here, we need a PO box for the Diomedes fan club over here on the Iliad. But because I love both of those characters now, and but oh my God, Prince Imrahil is a a good example character, and he got dropped. I'm going to have to think more about that.
These are characters that like they just keep what's the phrase? I'm not that much of a gamer. You keep rolling 10s for everything.
Yeah, they keep and they're morally upstanding. Like I guess when we go through the Lord of the Rings here for Table Talk, I'll pay more attention to that. But like they're morally upstanding. They're on the side of right, consistently. They do what they should be doing. They're showing you what should be done. I'm going to think more about that particular character archetype. The good example. Cool. The good example as we go through here. I mean, good. I'm saying relative. I mean, it's not like Diomedes isn't like this, murderous warrior. It's just but I mean, in the context of the story,
in the context of war, being a great warrior is what you got to be.
Yes. Yes, that's what I was trying to bring up. Yes.
That brought up another topic that I have on my list.
Okay, go for it. Perfect.
Because one of the things that I was realizing as I was reading that is noteworthy, this is like an example of ancient Greek culture, is that they go out of their way to basically characters that you're not supposed to like are described as ugly. It was one of the earliest. I'm trying to remember, let me see if I wrote down what the name of this character was. Where was it? I have way too many notes. I can't find where it was. I didn't write down who it was. It was Thersites. I don't know if I'm saying that correct. Because in ancient Greece, they associated beauty with moral goodness. Because also all the heroes that we're supposed to like, we often go out of the way to say things like the comely shape of their thighs, and like they're Hollywood heroes. It's very much Hollywood morality, where it's like the ugly ones are the bad guys and the beautiful ones are the heroes. And fun historical fact, there was a time, and I love this story. There was a time in ancient Greece where I'm trying to remember what this woman was. I want to say she was like, I guess she was like a courtesan or a prostitute or something like that. And she was on trial for, what was it? I think she had done something that was like offensive religiously, maybe. Like she was on trial. She was seen to have, have done something wrong, whatever. And part of her defense was to get naked in front of the judges and basically be like,
yes,
I mean, look at this. Could something this beautiful be evil? Like, clearly I'm morally upstanding. Like, look at these boobs. They're perfect. And they said, and the judges agreed. That is a historically documented thing. They're like, you know what? Yeah, we can't destroy we can't destroy this beauty. Like, clearly you're morally upstanding if you're that beautiful, which is really messed up, but also really funny. And I think it's interesting to see, like, that you see that in the Iliad multiple times.
I even think there's a bearing of a breast in the Iliad here, and I actually thought about something like where a woman bears her breast to makes. It wasn't that same point, but it was the same other point or something like that. And I was thinking about that in similarity here when we are doing that.
Yep. Yeah. So I don't think that's a good moral value to have, because that obviously is not rooted in reality at all. But that was something that was very much believed in ancient Greece, that like philosophers were talking, beauty was associated, like a better way to put it would be like morality had aesthetics, and morality and aesthetics were intertwined. So
let's talk about Patroclus.
Okay. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, wait, how is his name? I've always said his name is like Patroclus in my name. Patrick. I don't. You're probably right though. That's probably correct. I think I've been saying it wrong. How'd you say it again? Patroclus.
I might not have had it. The way that I've been seeing it, it's Patroclus. Patroclus. So it's not es. So it's not Patrocles. It's Patroclus.
Patroclus.
At least the way that I was listening to it.
Oh, that's how you were listening to an audiobook. So I'll trust that. That's gonna be so
Patroclus. Yes, you're right. So yes, okay. So Sable has the Patroclus, right? So it's not. Yeah, he's got the same spelling I had. That is not ease Patroclus. But okay, so this character, I didn't get to rewatch the movie Troy. But the movie Troy has definitely influenced me. Like it might be one of in the great epics of the great historical epics. It might be overall a mediocre entry into that genre, but there are a few things of that have influenced me.
Yeah.
And this relationship between Achilles and Patroclus is different in the movie adaptation of Troy and here.
I haven't seen Troy, so fill me in.
Okay, so in Troy, which is something that influenced and shows up in a twisted way, in a variation in one of the stories that I'm writing. Okay, Patroclus is Achilles' cousin. And when Achilles refuses to fight, okay, the Greeks are being whipped up on. Patroclus and Achilles look a lot alike, which that has that thing. And so Patroclus decides that he's going to put on Achilles' armor. I don't think it's younger brother. It might be. It might be cousin, but they're related. Yeah, cousin.
Yeah,
okay.
I was gonna say I don't think they're related.
Patroclus, but they are in that and so they're very similar because Achilles teaches Patroclus to fight, and they're also very similar in like height and build because they are related. And so when Achilles decides to not fight, Patroclus is trying to get him to fight. It's going badly for the Greeks. Patroclus puts on his armor, Achilles' armor, without his knowledge, and leads the Myrmidons into battle. And everybody looks at Patroclus in Achilles' armor and thinks that Achilles has come to the battlefield finally. The Greeks do this. And of course, in the idea in the Iliad was that we're going to scare the Trojans into thinking that Achilles has come. But even the Greeks in that are surprised and think that, oh my God, Achilles is finally here and he's leading the Myrmidons out. And so when Hector kills Patroclus in the movie Troy, he thinks he's fighting Achilles.
Right.
And he kills Achilles. He thinks he kills Achilles there in battle. And then when Achilles gets word, he rides out and like, oh my, you didn't kill Achilles. Here I am right now, come and get me.
And that triggers his rage, knowing that his friend is dead.
Well, right. But it's a different, there's the rage that he's dead in both of them, but the significance is very different because Achilles in the Iliad is involved in Patroclus. Like Patroclus says, we got to go fight. We got to go fight. Right. We got to send the Myrmidons out to fight. And Achilles is like, I'm not fighting. Okay. Well, then I got to take the Myrmidons out there. Patroclus says, give me your armor. I will lead the Myrmidons. It'll scare the Trojans. We'll go into battle and we'll win the day. And Achilles is like, okay. And he even prays for their success and the return of Patroclus. So he sends Patroclus out there in his armor deliberately. Whereas in the movie, it is something that Patroclus does on his own without Achilles' knowledge.
That's interesting because the implication there morally on Achilles' side, I feel like that hammers it home more in the Iliad because it's like it's directly his fault, right? It's not indirectly his fault, it's directly his fault, and that he's like, I'm still going to hold on to, going to hold on to my rage and my stance here, even though I'm putting my friend in danger. And it's clear that this is a very close friendship, which of course many people have interpreted, and it's not a friendship.
Let's talk about that more in a moment. Let's get to that. But let's talk about the meaning of whether or not Achilles sends him out or not.
Yeah. That was all I was going to say on that. I feel like that indicts, is that the right word? It indicts Achilles more if he's like, it's going to be fine. I'm going to, because he loses something very important to him. But it's interesting is both of those still have the same message because it's just a difference between being indirect and direct.
Well, it puts the spotlight on a different character. And that's what I was picking up because I've got a very similar beat that is in a story that I'm writing on. In the Iliad, if Achilles is like, you're right, we need to get out there and fight. Hector is coming over. They're going to burn our ships. We got it. But I'm still so upset with Agamemnon. I'm not going. But
where are your priorities, Achilles?
I agree with you that we should go. So here, take my armor, lead the guys. It's a sacrifice of Patroclus by Achilles. And then he prays, please bring, let them be successful and let Patroclus come back from battle. And in the Iliad, man, Patroclus is also not someone to not be reckoned with. I mean, he goes on a murderous spree when he gets Achilles' armor on, and he goes out there. I mean, he leads the Myrmidons on quite a murderous spree through the Trojan ranks. So he's not at all incapable in the Iliad. I mean, he's definitely also one of the great heroes of the Greeks, that he goes. But it's a sacrifice, like, because at that point, Achilles does know what's right. What should he do? Go and fight. I need to go and fight, but he's still refusing it, and he sends somebody else to fight in his stead, and that person pays the ultimate price for Achilles' lack of willingness to do what he should be doing at that time. Whereas the other way, if Achilles won't go out there, and then Patroclus still steals the armor without Achilles' knowledge, passes himself off as Achilles to the Greeks, and leads them into battle, knowing that he's not as good and is probably sacrificing himself. Patroclus is sacrificing himself in that one.
That's very different emotionally.
It's very different emotionally. It's putting the spotlight on the character of Patroclus in that one, saying, like, I know Achilles is wrong, and so I'm going to do something. I'm helping my side. It's self-sacrificing. It's disobedience.
It's very heroic.
It's very heroic. It's disobedience to even someone as great as Achilles when you know that they're wrong, even if it's going to lead to your death. That to me is also, I actually, like I said, I think the movie Troy overall is mediocre. But to me, that was a powerful message, that the idea that, okay, Patroclus is going to do this on his own.
That seems superior from a storytelling perspective. I think I like that more.
That's one of the small things that I think might be superior. I understand the message in Homer, because Homer is all about Achilles' rage. So if
it almost makes Achilles it makes him a little bit harder to like, because it's like that he's going so far at that moment.
Very far, right? Homer is pushing that, because by putting the spotlight on Achilles with that decision, he's definitely pushing that even further with Achilles. Right. I know I should go fight, but listen, I'm sending you, so whereas the other way, he's still extremely obstinate. Like if Patroclus takes his armor unknown, Achilles hasn't even made the realization that he should go fight, because in the Iliad he goes, yes, I should go fight, but I am still so upset with Agamemnon, I'm sending you instead. In this, his mindset is still, no way. Patroclus hasn't even made inroads in him against what he should be doing, and so Patroclus says, like, this guy is such a wall of stone, I'm going to have to do something on my own. So and I actually have I have that story beat in Rabivania, but it's even a different twist. It hits a different thing too. So it's a different theme. So I can't wait to talk to it. It'll be a while, but I can't wait to talk about that, because I love this idea. And he goes out. So Patroclus goes out, because I think depending on what character you put the focus on, you could teach a different theme. You could talk about a different theme to the story. So Patroclus puts the armor on of Achilles, which is fantastic armor. Again, you've got all the gear porn of Achilles' armor. This is before Hephaestus makes him new armor. And then Patroclus is out there carving a swath through all of the Trojans until he gets to Hector. And Hector, takes him out and takes all of the armor. Of course, the stripping of the gear of the heroes is very important in all of
that was apparently I feel like that tells you a lot about warfare of that era, that was a big thing, like being able to take the armor from the other side. A lot of people put a lot of effort into getting armor and stopping the other side from getting armor. Like, nope, you cannot take the armor of my friend. Like, that's a very and like they're fighting over a body. That's really interesting. Like,
it is. That tells you again what they value, right? It's got to be the
trophy element. Like, it's not just that these things are valuable, because they're valuable. Certainly, they're going to be economically valuable, but they're also like, that's a trophy. I have the armor of so and so. Like, that's something that you can say.
Yes. They are definitely big into the taking of war trophies. And I forget who it was. It might have been Ulysses or whatever, but there is even a scene where somebody needs some kind of weapon or something like that. And the guy's like, I got 30 Trojan spears in my hut. Go pick one up. Like, I got that. He's right. That like he's definitely taking war trophies.
Right. But that's a big part of the appeal of war is like, yeah, you're risking your life, but you might get some cool war trophies as a result. And like, I feel like that's a big part of the, like what the experience is for these soldiers. I have one other random note if I can make. There is a retelling of specifically of Achilles and Patroclus that I absolutely adore. It's called The Song of Achilles. And I'm trying to remember because that's one thing that would be interesting to go back to that book. I don't remember which version it was, like if it was Patroclus's choice in that one or not. But that is a very beautiful. That one focuses. That's telling the story from the perspective of Patroclus. He's the one narrating. I highly recommend it.
Oh, okay.
Madeline Miller, she writes these like retellings of Greek myths from the perspective, like her other book is all from the perspective of that one witch that Odysseus meets that turns people into pigs. It's like the whole story just from her perspective. She likes to like take these characters and be like, all right, from this character's perspective, let's tell. And she's a great writer. Side note, like I'll read anything she writes. But yeah,
it is funny that Ajax is a cleaning product to most Americans.
Stronger than Greece. Yep. Yep.
But Ajax is actually such a great hero, great Greek hero. And I liked Ajax in this too. I liked Ajax too.
Which one?
Which one? Okay. I had in here the stripping of the dead and taking the war trophies, just as an also note similar to the nipple note, I guess. But they use rocks as weapons a lot. They throw a lot of rocks at each other. I mean,
you got to use what you got.
They fling a lot of rocks, and it's often noted that like this is a rock that men today could not lift, but that this particular hero lifted. Like two men today could not lift. The idea that a degradation of humanity since then, because these people are so close to gods who are fighting this war that this person picks up a rock to throw at this other person.
But it's not a rock. It's a big one. Okay.
And it's a huge rock that today 2 men could not even lift. But Diomedes lifts it without effort and then hurls it at whatever and whoever and crushes his thigh, or whatever. They just the rocks as weapons come up a lot. Okay, so even a really interesting note. They're talking about the equipment before we go on to other things like that. Just the things I take note of. That's like at one time, when they were talking about the war-weary Greeks, they're having to go into battle. I mean, they've been fighting like they do. But then we got some fresh people who are coming up, and they're like, hey, if you are weary, if you have been fighting all day and you have a heavy shield, exchange this to one of the fresh people coming in who have a lighter shield. And then give the lighter shield, and they all exchange equipment. Like that kind of note here that Homer's putting in about the different weights of shields, and that they are exchanging among more tired fighters and fresh fighters. That kind of detail is fascinating to me.
Yeah, it tells you a little bit about warfare styles and like the kind of stuff that would happen. And yeah, I just randomly thought of something I meant to say on an earlier topic when we were talking about the difference of gender with the gods and with the mortals. There was a random note that I ended up going aside and researching, because when they first start the battle that's recorded in the Iliad, the first time they're about to fight, there's this mentioning of a mound, like this hill that they're coming over, and they said they thought it was this, but it was actually the tomb of so and so. And I was like, who is this? And I researched it, and this was the tomb of a what are they called? The Amazon. It was an Amazon warrior, a very prominent Amazon warrior queen who like led battles and stuff. I was like, well, there you have your random little exception. Like the Greeks, I feel like they had their general, the ways that things generally were, but they also had their exceptions, at least in their stories. So there you have it. I want to say this might have been a demi-goddess, though. I don't know. I need to look her up because she was interesting, but because I'd never heard of this character before. But yeah, random side note. It's like just barely mentioned in the text. It's like, they're fighting on top of the grave of an ancient female warrior queen person. Yes.
What did you think about? So then, why don't we go to the hypothesis of the homosexuality of Achilles and Patroclus?
I don't think it's possible to know one way or another, but I do like that telling, just because I think it explains the depth, like the extremity of his reaction. Like I think I don't know. To me, it makes more sense, but it's not like the text is telling you one way or another. So
that was kind of my similar opinion. That I was like, I don't know, because it's not,
because it feels like it's that's how you would act if someone that you deeply loved was killed. Like,
yeah, you could explain it that way. It could certainly be explained that way. I didn't get that in the time that I got that. I was like, if I were like looking for evidence of this theory, the place where that was most evident to me was when the ghost of Patroclus, his shade, shows up to talk to Achilles, and they have quite a conversation right there. And I was like, well, in everything that everything I'd heard when they were still alive and his reaction after the death and things like that, that could be the case. You could certainly go that way, but maybe not.
Yeah, it's not like it explicitly says it.
The strongest evidence that seemed like where I was like it's not evidence. It's where I could most see the interpretation of the story in that way, or the characters acting in that way, if you were like directing them or something like that, was the interaction of Achilles and Patroclus's shade.
Remind me, because I don't remember that part.
Fantastic, because Patroclus shows up as this ghost. The ghost of Patroclus shows up later on to Achilles, which I was not prepared for. So it was but on the other hand, I was thinking about that with regard to having read Dominion, and I was like, it's fascinating to me that obviously by having read Homer, now we're not reading it in the ancient Greek. There's obviously a chasm between my understanding of having read this translation and actually listening to this as an oral history or an oral poem in its original language,
right?
What, 800 BC or whatever it is. I don't know.
A long time ago.
There's a chasm in the understanding. So I can't really say that I understand. I try to read it and I'm like, man, what is this telling me that is valuable in Greek culture? About war. That's what do these people want? But there still is a chasm between that, and so trying to understand based on this information the sexuality through a modern lens of what could possibly have been the relationship between these two characters, I can't say.
Yeah. I feel similar. I think I like that telling. I like that. Maybe that's like a what did you say? It's not like a what do you call that one? Headcanon. I like that headcanon because I think it makes his, like I was saying, I think it makes the emotion stronger. That retelling I told you about, the song of Achilles, does make that explicit. And so that was like that was Madeline Miller's. She was like, I'm going to defend this. I think this is why these characters behave the way they do, and I'm going to tell their backstory. I'm going to tell, like, she reimagines a whole bunch of stuff, but it's like very beautifully done. But the fact that Patroclus becomes a ghost, she uses to her advantage, because like we're telling this from Patroclus's perspective, but then he dies. So how do I continue to tell the story? Well, he's still around.
Oh, so she took advantage of the fact that he shows up as a ghost.
She took advantage of that to solve some story problems. So it's a very interesting choice.
Though, but so also strong feeling. Like that's one possible. Like you could interpret that absolutely through a 21st, or 20th century, late 20th century lens of homosexuality. I think you could absolutely tell a story, like that. I think you could, but does it have to be? No, you could totally. I think also
no, it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be. But then also, like I was thinking about even like
they were so explicit in Greek stories. Like You know what I mean? Like that kind of a thing was common in Greek myths. So.
I think, we don't have a whole lot of history between those two characters either. We're jumping in. Now, maybe that's told in other stories that we also don't have access to, because obviously the story, like we're jumping into the ninth year of the Trojan War. I mean, there's a lot that, like we talked about at the beginning, that has happened that we are not told in the Iliad. So, I mean, we could have a whole lot more information. They could have had a whole lot of understanding about the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus based on other stories, one way or another, that we just do not have access to. And then that would tell you, so that's like, I don't know what I would think if I were listening to this in its original language and what this would mean to me. And even, I mean, the struggle to me, as I'm reading this, and I think this has been brought up before, and I think it's an interesting theme to go forward as we talk about other things, especially things like our Bible analysis or the Odyssey or other things, that to me it seems obvious that there is a common thread of humanity. That, like, I'm reading this ancient text here,
right?
And I'm getting even through the years and the translations and all of this, some thread of common humanity that is connecting me to the people of this age. So that justifies, in a certain sense, the idea of the humanities being a valid subject of study. There is something that connects us all as part of humanity, the themes, this idea of rage and anger and love and these kinds of things. But in another very real sense, I don't have any idea what it would have been like to be a 9th century Greek. Like what I would have thought about, the way I would have thought about things, what I would have thought about sexual relations. I mean, we just have such little information on it. And plus, it's not like if you just read a book, if we do have, some kind of, textbook on it, is that really the same as living it? That I'm always struggling. I'm pulled between those two things. The first, the common understanding of the humanities, that there is something that ties this, but then also the contrast that really, these are really different cultures than what I live in here in Alabama, in 2024.
Yeah.
Do I really understand how they would have thought about things?
I feel like we have a pretty decent understanding of how the Greeks thought about, I say the Greeks, like that's already a broad term, a culture over many cities and lots of period of time. But broadly speaking, I feel like we have a pretty good sense of what they thought about homosexuality. Basically, it was like, it was fine to engage in homosexuality, specifically as a man, but it did depend on which sex act you took, because they were very macho.
Right.
So to be effeminate was very looked down upon. And they didn't have that associated, like in modern day, the West, we associate gayness with being effeminate, which is, they didn't in like the Greek or the Roman world. It was like, but being the bottom, shall we say, was seen as being effeminate. But so there was a lot of, if you were, a Greek man might have a sexual relationship with someone that was lower in rank or younger, which is very problematic to modern day understanding. But that was seen as fine. That was perfectly manly. But that was important. Being manly was very important to them. You did not want to be a woman or woman-like in any way. So like with Zeus, for example, there's a story. Zeus had a male lover, but it was immortal. So he took this mortal that was just beautiful. Everybody fell for this mortal guy, men and women, and because he was just the most beautiful man ever. And Zeus was like, I want him. But that was fine. Then that wouldn't have made Zeus seen as less manly. That was the most manly thing he could do, is to take this person and make him his lover. So I think that we have that general sense that, like, being masculine was extremely important. And same-sex behavior wasn't seen inherently as being as not manly. It just depended on the situation and what the dynamics were between the two men.
Like the only thing that I would add to something like that is that I was looking up that, and this was something that came from some of the other reading I was doing, that like the word homosexuality didn't even exist until 1868.
Yeah, they wouldn't have had that concept.
Yeah, if we're talking about
homosexual,
what do ancient Greeks, think about.
That's why I worded it that way, to engage in homosexual activity.
Right.
That was how they would have thought of it. Like,
that's not even something that is in there. Like, so what would I, if I lived in, 10th century BC Greece, what would I think about homosexuality? I wouldn't even have that word. So how would that change the way I even think about sexual relationships? Because
it wouldn't have been an identity. It would have been like something that some people did.
We certainly don't have like the modern concept of identity. That's a different thing. But I mean that, like, what words would I have used to express it? If I have different words, how would that have shaped what I think of as sexual conduct or sexual relationships? Because I would not have thought about it using a word, anything, the homosexuality, because that's, 2,000, not quite 2,000, but 2,000 years later. Like what is this word? Like, what would they have said? Like, what would they have thought?
They had words for it. They had words, but I'd be curious if anyone in the chat knows more about this, because I'm trying to remember. My thinking is that, if I recall correctly, in the ancient Greek language, they had very specific words for different sexual acts, and some of them they would use as insults. How do I put this in a YouTube friendly way? There was like a word, like a verb in ancient Greece that was like, for penetration of someone's ass, but that was like, to wish that on someone was a curse. Like that was like a curse word. I was like, fuck you. It's like, so you could say that to someone in ancient Greek to be like, yeah, I hope someone does that to you. So that was like, that would have been demasculating or whatever. What's the phrase I'm looking for? Emasculating. Yeah, I think they had very specific words for sexual acts, all sorts of different words that have their own verbs.
But I'm always conscious of that one that I don't know, because people always, that word is this, that means that, like, maybe they didn't have that word. Or if somebody says, did you know that this word over here actually means, was this ancient word that means this? Well, I don't speak 9th century BC Greek, so I guess I'll just have to take your word for it. Because like right here, that like Sable's like, so what was actually being said, and what is an interpretation that, okay, Ganymede, is this, did the Greek mean lover, or did it mean cupbearer, or what does this mean? I don't know. So I'm just saying, I'm always conscious of that. Like, when we're reading that I'm connected, that I think, yeah, I really understand this, because I understand, I think, common themes and feelings that seem to connect us all, regardless of culture and time. And yet, in another way, I'm always like, well, I can't help but understand this in my modern context, because it's really not possible for me to understand this in another way. I can try. I mean, like you were talking about with the different sexual acts. I mean, I'm not saying it's not a worthy endeavor to try, and we can stretch ourselves in that direction. But at the end of the day, I don't speak this language. I didn't read it in the original language. I have very, very little information about what it actually means, what it actually means to have been in Sparta at that time.
Yeah.
So I could just, those are two different poles that always pull me.
For sure. And there's another way to think about this too, which is that when it comes to a myth, this kind of a story, I would almost say that it's, how do I put this? Like I would lightly question the value in trying to get it super accurate to its old context to a certain degree, because it's also like, but that context no longer exists. Like, the people that were in that culture at that time are no longer experiencing the story. We're the ones experiencing the story. And so there's always a certain element of adaptation that a story has, as it is, if it survives, it's going to be those, like you're describing, those common human elements of humanity. But it's kind of impossible to interact with an old story without bringing in interpretation that is to a certain degree, like, from your own culture. And I don't necessarily see that as a negative. Like I kind of, which is kind of why I like those kinds of retellings, like what Madeline Miller does. I embrace that, because it's like, but you're making that even more relevant to a new audience.
I would say, as long as you approach it with the understanding of what you know what you're doing, because that's why we don't have the translation of the Iliad. We were just talking about comparing different so different translators will have different purposes and things like that. And different biases, because I've also read other translators, like, I don't think that what I listened to was particularly trying to capture the poetic nature of the language itself. I don't think, because like another translator,
so important.
Really important here is the sound and poetry, because this is an oral thing. And like, I don't know if this is true or not, but some part of it that I was talking about, it's like somebody was saying in the ancient Greek part of this thing, when somebody like the ships or, somebody's ships were coming up, that there's a whole bunch of like alliteration and the sound that he's actually using the words that sound like sloshing water if you speak ancient Greek to describe this. Okay. Well,
which is lost to us now. That's fascinating.
In that case, I completely didn't get that,
right.
So if that was important to the understanding, if the way that it's told as an oral poem and the words that he's using and the sounds that are coming out and the rhythm there, then I completely don't have that. So that's another way that's like, well, I've got everything I can get in some sense, but I got to recognize what I don't have, when trying to recognize the story.
Yeah. It's good to keep that kind of stuff in mind.
Yeah, I know. I think you have to keep that in mind. I think you have to that. But otherwise you just go with, hey, well, I don't know, but I mean, I think maybe we've been over that. But yeah, in all of these stories, like what is being preserved, but then what is also not? What do we not know?
Yeah, it's kind of sad to think about what's being lost, but it's also like that's inevitable.
Yeah,
that's just how it is. But the cool thing about it is the fact that despite things that are being lost, right, like the language, nobody speaks that language anymore. It's so amazing that it has stayed this long, and that speaks to the power and like why I get so much joy out of reading really, really old stories like this. It's not the fact that they're old. It's the fact that they've lasted this long. Like there's something so universal about, old classics that just, they literally last, millennia, like because people keep coming back to it and they keep relating to it in some way. But like, this is something truly great that it's lasted this much. It's a truly important part of the human literature conversation, like the Iliad is one of those that's just like, it's still here. We're in a completely different world, completely different cultural context to the Greeks that are listening to it, and yet we're still resonating with it. That's powerful. Different language, different. Yeah.
I would say that yes, but I would also say that I don't know. Like I think it might be a mistake to give primacy. Could be a mistake to something like the Iliad that we haven't said. Look what is endured. There might be other texts that were much more important to the ancients. Or there was, and they were lost only through accident of history. It wasn't that, oh my God, this is so, that like, it just happens to be that our only text of those got burned, and so we don't have them. So I can't even say that like, well, the Iliad must be so it's influential on our society because we have it. And so there's, all the arts and stuff like that.
It's both.
I don't know if that's like that. I mean, there could have been something else that the Greeks just really loved even more. And we just, by accidents of history, we don't have.
Accidents of history is absolutely part of that. But I think the longevity of it, because something that is not important to people, they will not preserve. It's less the case now in the information age, right? Because we can keep everything. But like, you think about, like, for example, I'm rereading the Old Testament right now, and I'm reading it with my roommate Karina, and we keep we're in Kings right now. Yeah, we're in Kings, and we keep encountering these parts where it'll be like, and the rest of the Acts of Samuel, they're not written down, and then they mention this text that we don't have anymore. It doesn't exist. And so at the time that this was written, everybody knew this text. Apparently, at least they acted like everyone knew this text. But these biblical passages, they ended up becoming more important, and so people put, like, for whatever reason, people preserve that more. There are more copies of it, because the more copies of it means that it's harder for it to get destroyed.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
People do preserve what is cared about, except for these acts. Like I was thinking, but I mean, I think even in the modern day, last 100 years, like we're talking about, I was reading something about one of the films, the early film studios that was burned. And how many hundreds, maybe thousands, I don't know, hundreds of films that were stored in the studio. That was it, and and they were all lost. And they were talking about how their whole career, people's whole careers, writers, directors, actors, were in that, and they're gone now. That just burned up, and that wasn't all that long ago, And then we stored a lot of media today, like VHS tapes. I mean, if you care about it, you may, but how many people like had home videos or important videos on VHS, and just had them. They're sitting over there. I got them safe in my closet, only to realize, oh my God, they degraded, and now I don't have them. And I really would have loved to have had them. Even I don't have a CD or DVD player in my house. Like I could be like, okay, here are my CDs and DVDs. It's got, all this, it's got the equivalent of Homer on it. It's on a CD. It'll be safe forever. And then all of a sudden I realized, you know what? I don't even own a CD player. I couldn't play that if I wanted to, and that's today, that's today. So I don't know.
Related to that, I've been thinking recently because I have a DVD copy of the first movie I ever made when I was 11 years old. And I think that's the only copy that exists. I feel like my dad made 2 copies of it, and he might have another copy somewhere else. But I've been thinking about that's been bothering me recently. I'm like, I need to rip that. I need to rip a digital copy of that, or because that's freaking me out. It's actually behind me, and underneath those are a bunch of boxes, and they're ugly, so I have a thing over top of them. But yeah.
Do you have? I have a comedic topic to end this in. If you,
I have more topics.
Oh, you have more topics. Okay, fantastic.
I've been letting you lead.
Okay, go for it. Okay,
go for it. Save the comedic one for the end.
Yeah, we'll save the comedic one for last.
Oh, so wait, let me just I'm just gonna have to go in order because I can't. There's too many things here. We'll see whatever I don't have, whatever we haven't talked about left. Whatever we haven't talked about yet. So one of the things that I want to mention that the first time I read this, and I recommend people doing it this way, which it sounds like you're on your way. But if you're going to read the Iliad, and you're going to read the Aeneid, and you're going to read Dante's Inferno, or at least any part of his Divine Trilogy, especially Inferno, read them in that order, because it is really fascinating. We're talking about influence. This actually is related to what we were just talking about. You can see it happen, how the Iliad directly influences the Aeneid, and the Aeneid directly influences Dante's Inferno. And that first opening is really important. It's kind of like a literature note, I suppose, less than a story note, where he's like Homer is asking for the muses to help him tell the story.
Right.
The Aeneid does something very similar in the opening. It's not like the very first words, but there's an opening. Part of the opening of the Aeneid is like, all right, please help me tell the story. And it's, I think that's a direct callback to Homer. And of course, the style of the writing is very much inspiration of Homer. The setting, like everything is like it's just continuing after the Iliad. And then in Dante's Inferno, he does a very similar thing, except Virgil, the author of the Aeneid, is a character in Dante's Inferno.
Right.
And Dante's also a character in there, and he specifically asks Virgil. He says, "Please help me tell this story." And so it's really cool to see. Like that's just one example, but there's a lot of things that are like, there's that influence, and I remember I felt when I read them that each one was not as good as the other. Like they were each like there was a greatness in Homer that each of them was trying to capture that I felt none of them lived up to, and they were trying really hard. Dante's Inferno feels so much like a fan fiction in a way, like it's written that way, just like if only I could make something as great as what you made. Please help me. It's like I don't know, and that was how I felt about it, just personally. Let's see, I'll go through. Interrupt me because I just have some final notes here. This isn't. We've been talking about gender and masculinity and things like that. We definitely see a lot of very masculine men openly weeping. So like in this culture, emotional suppression would not be a masculine value, which I feel like is kind of a value in our culture today. Which you see in a lot of ancient texts, I think is really interesting. I feel like you see that in which is not an ancient text, but like Lord of the Rings too. Well, I haven't read the books, but even the
we're going to. That's on the list.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. But yeah, that's just an interesting side note. I had to make a note of rosy fingered dawn, which is a very famous phrase from the Iliad, which we'll see references to.
There was in my copy, there was the phrase bites the dust. Someone bites the dust.
Ooh.
And that made me wonder, course, that's from a 1920s translation, 1920s or whatever. But I was wondering, like, how literal a translation was that? Is the is bites the dust something that comes to us like actually from Homer, or is that only 1920s, old, or but that's like that to me sounds like a very modern phrase. Another one bites the dust. Someone, the song and all like that just seems so modern. And then I heard that phrase in this 1920s translation of the Iliad, and I was like, really? Were the ancient Greeks talking about someone biting the dust? Like, that's cool.
That's interesting. Another one. I don't remember. Just to make a side note, we're talking about like famous phrases. I don't remember if this is in the Iliad or if this is in the Odyssey. Well, I'll find out when I read them both again. But there's also the phrase "wine dark sea" that comes up, which is a very famous one. People have been like, do you remember? Did you remember seeing that one in the Iliad?
I do not.
So it's probably in the Odyssey. I would think it would be there. So maybe we'll talk about that later with the Odyssey. But yeah, that's a funny one because a lot of people throughout history have been like, huh? What does wine dark sea mean? And people have had a lot of like discussions about like what Homer was trying to express. But maybe we should come back to that another time. That's a really funny, like specific rabbit hole to go down.
Sable says that is from the Odyssey. Sable says
that is from the Odyssey. Okay, save that.
BGD, I'm wondering what you thought about this conversation, because I know you were talking about liking the Odyssey so much better and stuff like that. But I thought there was so much stuff to talk about with regard to the Iliad. So I hope that you think this was a productive conversation, that we had interesting things to say about it. I mean, not that he implied that there was not interesting things to say about it, but I was like, oh my God, there is so much stuff in here. I've got to talk about this. You've been the perfect person to do this with.
I made a note. Oh, sorry. Should I do another one? Or you have to?
No, go ahead.
I made a what? I think we have a slight delay. I made a note that it was really interesting the descriptions of the sacrifices. I thought that was another kind of like historical insight about like how they did their sacrifices, because it was very specific. They were just describing which parts of the animal they did what with. It was very specific. But they ate some of it, so it's kind of like a shared meal with the gods. One thing that was unclear to me was that this is one of the things that probably would have been obvious in its context, but to a modern day reader, I'm like, there must have been meaning to like behind which parts, like were they giving the best parts to the gods? I don't know. I wasn't clear on that. I was curious to know if you had any thoughts.
Well, I guess I thought so.
I would have assumed as much. Yeah.
That okay, and also that like, all right, time to go and sacrifice something. Like, I got something to do. Better go sacrifice to the gods. Mm-hmm. Time to get. The word hecatomb was not one that I knew until I was reading this, but the word hecatomb came up, HECATOMB, because there's going to be a hecatomb to the gods. This is a great celebratory sacrifice that comes from the slaughter of 100 100 oxen. So this would be a big one that like that at the beginning, the word hecatomb was in the Iliad quite a bit. And then in the beginning of the Odyssey, which I read, it's like there was going to be a hecatomb to Poseidon in Ethiopia. And so it was like, I'd better get there because I don't want to miss that. They're having a hecatomb. So that's going to come up. I'm going to use that word too, a hecatomb, for great sacrifice to like 100 oxen sacrifice to gods.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that you would want to give the gods the best part. I feel like if you didn't, they would be offended. And the Greek gods are not the kinds of gods you want to offend, because they can hold a grudge for a very long time. So we'll assume that. Oh, I just wanted to make another note about the fact that we see so much of the humanizing of all the just different characters that are dying, and the fact that we're seeing kind of heroes on both sides and stuff like that, which it brought up a question for me, which is this the correct way to tell a war story? Like, is the best way to tell a war story one where you're showing the full impact of the war and not giving it a one-sided look? What do you think?
Well, this is actually something I meant to talk to you. I said I'm going to talk about in the beginning, and I think I forgot to, so I'm glad we're getting into this again. So the violent description here that we're getting to. Okay, so this is I don't know if I would call it clinical, but close. Like to talk about it, because if you're talking about, okay, like we got a situation here where somebody is about to get a sword stroke across their brow and their eyes are going to fall out onto the floor. Okay, on the ground before them. Okay, that is pretty graphic. Okay, but on the other hand, so that goes. That's why we're talking about rated R versus what's in a lot of the Bible. Like we're talking about like the different phraseology, again, certain translations, like smote with the edge of the sword, or has been slain. I don't remember a whole. I mean, I'm not saying it's not there, but I'm just saying there's a lot more descriptions about this guy getting the spear thrust in this particular location, the eyes falling out, all of that here in Hector, in Homer, that is being read. But that's still but he could have gotten much more graphic. I mean, if you're talking about, hey, some type of modern fantasy writer today, we need to write a scene
like City of Reckoning.
Yeah, like City of Reckoning or whatever.
Fluids in mine. Like I describe blood a lot.
Yeah. Fluids, pain, the feel of the sword as it goes through someone's skull, across when their eyes are torn out. I mean, you could get a lot more graphic than what Homer is doing.
All that's implied. Yeah.
But it's implied, but he's still giving you quite a bit, but it's not. So I was trying to get I never wanted to stop reading, like with Gates of Fire, which we'll got to go through too. I mean, that's the only book that I have the only book that I have ever had someone tell me that they had to stop reading it because it was too violent. I mean, that happens with movies quite a bit. Like I had to turn that one off, man. That was like what you're watching in a movie, too graphic. I had to turn it off. I don't really, Joe Abercrombie, could be, I've read some of Joe Abercrombie. Oh no. Okay. So I was going over Joe, but, Mark Smiley is also very, but so I guess my point was though, you could go much deeper. You can go to much more graphic. So you can go to Stephen Pressfield where people will actually not read the book because it is so violent, like the descriptions of what is going on and what is, because, these people walked in, 1,000 people died, okay, that's violent, but it's not stopping you from reading it type of violence.
I had someone tell me once that they regretted reading my book while they were eating. So I have that going for me.
So I mean, so they're different. There's difference here. So I mean, like I said, I wouldn't go quite to the word clinical description of the violence, but in some ways, I mean, it's specific. It's very specific description of the violence and particular deaths. If you were to adapt, so it's been a long time since I've seen Troy, but I mean, you could adapt this into. I see something like the Band of Brothers talking about here, or the Saving Private Ryan. I mean, I suppose there is an adaptation that could be done of the Iliad that is a movie adaptation. There would be extreme violence in your face that some people would like. I can't watch this because I don't think anybody had that reaction to Troy. Probably somebody, but I mean, overall, I think Troy was, fantasy heroic violence, probably blood and killing and all, but fantasy heroic violence. But it would be different to watch that. I mean, a director could put that on screen in a real violent way and say that they are adapting this faithfully, and be true. But that's true. Like, here's a faithful adaptation of what Homer was trying to tell you happened when these people fought.
But it's different to see. Yeah.
It's different. So, I mean, how do we deal with that? The difference between seeing this and reading it there's reading it in the more clinical way, reading it in the, I'm going to see what I can do as far as a description. I'm going to give you the smells of, whatever, and versus seeing it on a movie theater. I don't know. I guess I don't know what kind of, maybe I don't really understand the question that's being asked, but it's more an observation here that we have these different levels of violence.
And they serve different purposes and they create different experiences. And so I think it all depends on what the intention is of the story. And for this story, the specifics seem to matter for that element of like immortalizing the actions, like what I was saying earlier. I don't know. That's my best guess as to why that's there.
Also, I ask you about the allure of violence. What's the allure? And I think I might have asked you that question badly at the time, because you're like, okay, so because I was kind of like, why describe the city of reckoning the way that it was, with this level of violence? We could probably ask. We can't ask Homer, but we could ask Homer the same kind of question. What was the allure of this? Why go to this level? But we could also ask Steven Spielberg the same question. What's the allure of the violence that you show when they show up on the beach of Normandy? Why do this? And I think there are reasons for this. One of them, I don't know. I don't know how Homer would answer. Homer would answer, when we're talking about, or, if you're talking about the book of Exodus, when you're talking about cities being overrun, that author describes those in certain ways, and it certainly implies a lot of violence, but does so in a very different way than Homer does. So like the choices that author made regarding violence are different. I would say part of that to me, so I guess I said, I can be rather violent when I'm writing as an author. Well, what's the purpose of that? Well, one of those is not wanting to look away from what is actually going on and what people have been through in the right context of a story. And that seems to be more like the Steven Spielberg, we're going on to the beach of Normandy kind of approach here, that in a certain way, by showing this, I'm doing honor to the people who have been through this. So it's possible Homer might answer in a similar way, that like, I didn't want to gloss over like what these guys went through, like, and what actually happened to them when they were on the battlefield. So he didn't have maybe the language to, get into it as a modern day fantasy author, or that
right, because it was a different style of storytelling.
It's a different style of storytelling, but whatever. But like he said, like, I'm not going to shy away. Like when somebody gets hit and their eyeballs fall out, and all of this, that he's gonna show you, and you're gonna stay with it. In a way, he's kind of staying with it the same way you did with the City of Reckoning.
There's a much less intelligent kind of an answer, which, and it's also maybe a darker, more uncomfortable answer.
Actually, I thought you said for a moment I thought you said that was a much less intelligent answer.
No.
Like, okay. So
you're like, oh, okay.
Okay. So there is. So what is your?
Which is just that it's cool. Like, I think there's a way in which we're drawn to. It's kind of exciting, like there's that element too of like, why would we go and watch an R-rated action movie? Is there a part of us that's also just like fascinated by it? I think that's part of it too. But yeah, I would like to think that, at least for me, if I'm putting violence, it's for a good reason, because I do think about it a lot. Like I'm always like, very intentional about, okay, what is the right violence for this story? And why? but that's kind of another part too, where it's just like, okay, why are we drawn to violent stories? I don't know. Like, is that just inherently interesting to human beings because it's part of our nature too? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it could be, and this doesn't answer this for the context of Homer, but
no,
it could certainly for today's modern world, that we don't encounter that all that often in general life in today's world. Now, you can certainly, if you are in the battlefield in Afghanistan or Iraq, I mean, you can. I'm talking about just in general Western society. We don't really deal with a whole lot of violence on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, most of us, fortunately.
Most of us don't.
Yeah.
We don't deal with death up close and personal in a major way. I mean, if someone dies, they often die in the hospital or taken away by specialists in our society who deal with that. They're not in our home, as often. I'm speaking in some generalities here, but like,
right, comparatively speaking.
Yeah, if you go to a wake, that used to be held in someone's home, so you would have like your family's dead body in your home. Whereas now you might go see them, but they're going to be at a different, location and things like that.
Kind of separated from
right. So there is that. So that could be it today. Like I'm going to when I went to look at different relics, in Europe, I always went to see the relics of any type of relic I could find. If there was a relic there when I was in Europe, I wanted to go see it, no matter where it was or and of course there are relics that are things like swords or sticks or robes, but there's also like someone's decomposing hand, that is sitting there,
Wow.
or their skull, and I'm sitting there looking at that. And so but that's still a way today. I mean, like most Christians in the United States don't, when they go to church, like have somebody's decaying hand there and their skull. But there are some relics here in the United States, which I need to go and see. That would be a great thing to go to see some relics. But that's more of a European thing. But even most Europeans don't necessarily engage with. But that's something that in the past you did. I mean, you had the catacombs or something like that, and dealing with that death and that kind of thing is more present, and that's not today. And so in today's storytelling, like, hey, let's engage with this more gruesome side of it that people might have dealt with in the past. I'm thinking about the movie American Beauty, when the guy was obsessed with like the dead bird and things like that. Like, look, I'm looking at death here, which we're more separated from. I asked BGD a question. He says there's a more intelligent answer. So BGD says there's also a more intelligent answer. Different media and different audiences make a different context for storytelling, which necessarily affect the artistic choices made by the author.
Well, that's, I think, what we were saying initially. But then right, that is the more intelligent answer. Yes.
Yeah. So it's not true that the violence that showing the violence is right for all kinds of storytelling, because it's not.
No.
That's not true. But there is something about when it's right that I guess I tend to tell stories that I think that it's right to go ahead and show it. But that also comes out of some of the experiences of my childhood where the violence is not shown. And so I'm like, no, the story never went there. And so I want to. And I told that story about the Knight and the Dragon that are gearing up for a fight, but then they don't really ever come to grips with it because they open up the barbecue stand instead. Okay, so that was going in a violent direction and then not showing it to you. And the same thing with like He-Man. Like He-Man as a kid with the cartoons, okay, age appropriate, whatever, or at least what is understood to be age appropriate in the 80s, early 80s, what is understood to be age appropriate in the 80s. Here it is. Like He-Man's got a sword, but he's never to kill anything. He's never allowed to hit anything with that sword. So I remember that also as a kid, that like, okay, He-Man, he should be fighting things.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, so he always does like judo throws, like the bad guy comes and he throws bad guys places, or wrestling moves. If he's got his sword out, he'll only hit a robot. Like, and they, especially in She-Ra later on, they would especially call out, like she could hit things with her sword, but they would say, "Oh my God, they're robots." Like somebody would call that out right before the battle.
Make sure the kids are not traumatized by this cartoon violence.
Or they're telling you you're not hitting something living here with the sword. Anytime a living bad guy came up, they needed to be like punched or thrown, but never
which is
hit.
Still violence, just different.
Which is still violence, but that's on a different level. I mean, if you got a sword and somebody's running up to you and you put away your sword and instead roll them over your shoulder into judo throw.
Yeah.
That there's something missing there that was then I appreciated when I watched the He-Man movie, for instance, which was much more a 1980s action movie where this He-Man does kill people, Skeletor kills people, some violently, screaming, sometimes with lightning, and some people are like, "Oh my God, what are we watching?" But I remember appreciating that in a certain sense as a kid, that okay,
it's more honest, right?
This was more honest, right? Yeah, exactly. It's a more honest kind of a fiction. There is something to always be said for age appropriate nature and all that.
Right.
But in some ways, I felt like the cartoon was in some ways not being honest. The movie really was. Yeah, so I think that's an excellent word. I like that word, honest. I like that. I
like that too. The more I think about it, yeah.
What happened?
Because the way, because we're talking about age appropriate stuff. Let's talk about kid stuff for a second. Like, if you're going to talk about dark themes with kids, I feel like there's a way to do it, and that is honest, where you're like directly engaging with something, but doing it in a way that you can process at that age. Like, that's what age appropriate means. It's like I can this is information delivered to me and themes delivered to me in a way that I'm able to process, and it's not traumatizing. Like, it's not more than my brain can take yet. I feel like that's the approach. It's not just like avoiding this. Like, let's just dance around the subject. And that can be difficult because every kid is different. Every kid is developmentally different, and you're gonna reach, certain points of being able to understand things at different, depending on the kid. So it's never going to be exactly perfect. It's inevitable that as a kid, you're going to engage with something at some point that disturbs you. Hopefully it's not too much, right? Like that's the idea. Like if it's also, when it is fiction, you're already engaging with it in a different way, especially if you're old enough to understand the difference between reality and fiction. There's a certain degree to which you're going to be okay. Like you're going to be okay with anything you interact with. You're going to know that it's not real. I think it's more likely to be traumatizing when you're really, really young and you don't know the difference. When kids are old enough, they're at that age where they ask their parents, is that real? Like at that age, that's when you maybe want to be a lot more careful. But yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of ranting. I just think that there's a degree to which it's going to depend on the kid, and hopefully the parents or the, guardians involved will know, when you're ready for certain kinds of things. But yeah, but kids are more resilient than I think a lot of people realize. And the idea is that you're engaging with something because you're going to eventually engage with this. Like eventually you're going to get older. You're going to see the dark parts of the world. And so kind of just avoiding all that isn't healthy either. But like being able to kind of get these sort of little like baby steps to understanding the darkness of the world, I guess, so that you're, able to make sense of it and not be so shocked by it. Maybe that's the best way to approach that. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yeah, and I agree. Like Sable's talking about the parental influence there too, right? So I mean, I think that's a thing. But right. I like this theme of honesty that where we're going. There's a we don't have to go all the way to the vibration of the sword scraping on the skull as it goes across. Whatever. Maybe for some ages, okay, this person was killed, and it wasn't.
And that's something that some kids are going to interact with. Some kids are going to interact with death, and so having a media that does that in a way that they can understand at that age might be helpful. Yeah.
What else did you have on your notes?
All right, let me go back. I've talked about most of these.
Like I say, it was like G.I. Joe is another one because like they can't shoot actual guns; they had to shoot laser beams. So it was laser beams and all that. But you're right; they shoot tons of those laser beams to really no effect at anybody. And also, even in He-Man, like when there were guns, like you'd have to be shot with a stun gun. They have to explicitly call out that somebody got shot with a stun gun, or probably more common was there was a freeze ray. Because that immediately gives you it's not somebody falling down. Oh, they were stunned. It was very often like a freeze ray. So somebody, if they're going to get hit by something, and then they turn into a block of ice. Okay, and that takes them out. It potentially be captured or something for that scene. But it's like, okay, yeah, but eventually Skeletor would have just shot him. But okay, it's always a freeze ray. Skeletor's like, I've hit these people many times, but only with my freeze ray. Eventually, if I just take a Glock instead of this freeze ray, I would have solved this problem by now.
I had a minor note here about how the gods getting involved in the fights kind of feels like cheating. Like it's like. It's very much unfair. We've basically covered this already, but it's just another note here. And that's not seen as like, that's just like the way things are, which is kind of reality, right? Like the random things happen and they're unfair. I feel like
that's how the heroes often take it. That, oh my God, I went out to do this and it was foiled by a god.
Yeah.
What do you do? Like
they don't see it as like injustice. They're just like
basically, I remember that like somebody throwing up their hands and be like, "Oh my God, I was going out to throw the spear at this person and kill them, and my spear throw was foiled, and that sucks." And it was a god's fault. Like that's what
it's the god's fault, which is an interesting way to phrase that, right? Like to a Abrahamic religion, any of the three, that you wouldn't have that phrase. Like you would never say that. Like, yeah. Anyway, we've already basically covered that. The other notes I had here, which is kind of bringing things full circle, because I had a couple other things to say about the influence of this. So I feel like that's a nice way to. I'll wrap up my thoughts, and we'll turn it over to your joke. Does that
Okay? Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good.
Okay. One of the things that I also wanted to mention about influence that I thought was a cool like thing that I didn't really think about or notice. So for my book City of Reckoning, one of the influences for that was the Red Rising trilogy. And the Red Rising trilogy was also influenced by the Iliad. So it's like multiple, like there's a direct and then an indirect. I would describe, by the way, you would like the Red Rising trilogy. I would love to reread it. Maybe put it about low on the list, but that could be a good one to go to someday. Fantastically epic science fiction. And you can feel the influence, like you really feel it when you're reading that series. Like I would rarely describe it as like the Iliad in space, not necessarily the story structure, but like the tone. It feels that way. Like the way those battles are described in that series is so cool, and you just feel the epic vastness and the weight of things. It feels the same way it feels when you're reading the Iliad. I don't know how else to put it. So that's a really cool series. And so yeah, people are still being influenced by this book, thousands of years later. And then I had one other, wait, I'll say this before I say that. There's something really cool about, and this is a translation thing too. I think some translations are better about this than others, but there is still that element. Like when I'm reading, I forgot I had some, wait. Okay. No, I need to talk about this for a second.
Okay.
There's an element to this. I don't know if you were listening to an audiobook, but when I read it, I often have the urge to speak it out loud. Like you feel that history of that, those like oral origins of the poetry, like even through, translations that are quite different. You just feel that, especially those long similes. I had a couple highlighted that I loved. Let me see if I can pull them up. How do I get to them? Because let me see, how do I get to my highlights? I love them so much. How do I get to them? Anyone know how to use Kindle? Oh my God, where is it? Go to, I don't know how to get to it. Let me just check for one more second. Here we go. I found them. All right. I'm going to read a couple examples.
Okay.
They're just so lovely. Okay. As when the waves run high before the blast of the south wind and break on some lofty headland, dashing against it and buffeting it without ceasing, as the storms from every quarter drive them, even so did the Achaeans rise and hurry in all directions to their ships. It's like beautiful images.
I agree.
Oh, here we go. I've got a couple more.
Okay.
Just some examples. So they're just appreciating literature. As when a goat herd from some high post watches a storm drive over the deep before the west wind, black as pitch is the offing, and a mighty whirlwind draws towards him, so that he is afraid and drives his flock into a cave. Even thus did the ranks of stalwart youths move in a dark mass to battle under the Ajaxes, horrid with shield and spear. Okay, here. Okay, maybe I'll make this one my last one. This was beautiful. This is a longer context. When they were got together in one place, shield clashed with shield and spear with spear in the rage of battle. The bossed shields beat one upon another, and there was a tramp as of a great multitude, death cry and shout of triumph and of slain and slayers, and the earth ran red with blood. As torrents swollen with rain course madly down their deep channels till the angry floods meet in some gorge, and as the shepherd on the hillside hears their roaring from afar. Even such was the toil and uproar of the hosts as they joined in battle. And there are just a million of these. They're all just like long. We would consider them almost like run-on sentences, but they're gorgeous.
No, I agree. I love it. I love listen. That's one of the reasons why I do listen to it. I love to listen to things that when I do this, when we go through the Silmarillion, there is a reading of the Silmarillion that is like, I mean, it's meant to be spoken, and
Yeah.
there's and I'm gonna find the version that I listened to because it was so amazing. Like as soon as I started listening to it, I heard someone sitting there at the campfire telling me the story of the Silmarillion. It's so amazing. I love that. Like, so I've had very unfortunately a lot less luck than you have with the writing of the film script version things, but when I sit down and I write, I think I go whence dreams come. I come up with things like the Trial of Saint Gabriel, which is likes to be read, and I think if I lean into that even further, when I go to Clovis, when I go to the Sepharach Kobiel, that's one of the lessons from reading the Iliad. I'm going to lean into that even further. And when I read that, I'm going to I'm going to lean into that even further with these versions that are coming out, because it's possible that I was trying to be a little bit too constrained, perhaps, as far as word count. But I wonder if I free myself of that and kind of go where I want to go. I wonder where I'll go, because I love this particular style. So go through this, the Iliad, and the spoken, the idea of the spoken word of this. I'm going to see where I go. That's where I'm going.
That could be a really important part of your voice. Like I feel like that's.
I think it is, because that's where I seem to naturally go.
Yeah, lean into that. That's awesome. Which means we need to make sure you're continuing to read stuff like this, because it's.
I know that's why I'm diving into more stuff like this, because that's what. Cameron said specifically read the Odyssey and Exodus before going on to write Clovis. So I did the Iliad first. The Iliad, then we got. But yeah, so I'm doing that. That's part of the study right before I do a whole lot more creative work. That's
awesome. I'll make sure to complete reading the Iliad, because I want to finish rereading it, and I'll reread the Odyssey, and I'll join in that conversation.
Do the Odyssey.
I would love to. All right, so I have one last note to wrap up all my comments, and this is going back to the influence. It's one of the things that was a really cool. I texted this to Heath and Doug about my duology. I realized that it's very helpful to describe it as being very Homerish. I don't know if we decided on what the right word is there. Homeric, Homerian, Homerish. I like Homerish.
Well, I like Homeric.
Homeric does sound cooler, but I was going for goofy. So.
Homer-ish sounds like it's kind of Homer-ish.
Homery.
Yeah. Homery.
Because this, like I was saying, like the poetry and the style of writing and the epicness and the scale, all these things in the Iliad very much influenced City of Reckoning. And the Iliad is an epic war story. City of Reckoning is an epic war story. My sequel that I'm working on right now, I actually recently reshifted my focus onto it after I finished my other screenplay. I've been describing it as an Odyssean type of a story, because it is an epic story, an epic journey, which the Odyssey is an epic journey. And I just made that connection the other day. I was like, oh, that's cool. Both of them are kind of influenced by the two books in the Homer's duology. So I feel like that's how I'm going to describe it to people, to make myself sound more sophisticated and cool, is to say that my trilogy is inspired by Homer on my duology. So yeah, that was a kind of a cool thought as a creative. Like, oh, I didn't even consciously make that connection, that they each had that influence. And that means, because I was feeling a little bit like uncertain about the fact that they are kind of structurally two different kinds of stories. But hey, Homer did it, so I can do it too.
Yeah, I know, that's awesome. I want to know more about that as we go on, and as people know more about the stories. So yes,
reading the Odyssey is probably going to help me working on this book.
Yeah,
I just realized that.
I gotta read and write. It's all writing, but there's so much to read before. He's right. Also, Bacon's talking about the Ulster cycle, the Vulgate cycle, Beowulf.
I need to read Beowulf.
James is an expert in Beowulf. He said he's read it in 4 different languages. He says.
Wow, that's awesome.
So Bacon's gonna do Beowulf. I gotta when I reread Beowulf. I think I've been through it, but I did not go through it in school, so it was later. I hardly remember any of it. If I have gone through it. So Bacon will be on deck for Beowulf when we get to it.
Neat.
I think we're at our best when we're doing these kinds of timeless kinds of talks here.
Yeah.
I hope everyone's enjoying it. So I just found this as I was going online looking up stuff about the Iliad. So I thought it would be a fun thing to end on. Someone had put together like this cartoonish thing about all the different deaths and stuff, the way things happen in the Iliad. And I thought it was funny. So this is like the deaths in the Iliad, Trojans and Greek, named deaths only, like the number of people who die, like by book here, which, by the way, the penultimate book where they are doing their funeral games is the only one that I was like, this does not belong here. Because even when we were in the slower areas about like the the ships and who is all on them, or the deaths of all these people and stuff, like I was understanding why all that was like, oh my God. Then we got to the funeral games and we're like, okay, we know where this story is going. The funeral games, man, that was the one that was the worst to get through, I thought. But nonetheless, so this was like Greeks and Trojan deaths, like how Trojan total 201 named Trojan deaths, 54 named Greek deaths by the top 3 grimmest deaths, according to this person. Number 1, Lycon, Greek. He gets a sword in the neck. Nothing held but a piece of skin, and from that Lycon's head dangled down.
Horrible.
That was book 16. Number 2, second, the number 2 winner, Carabrines, Trojan, gets a rock to the head. A sharp stone caught on Hector's charioteer on the forehead. It shattered both his eyebrows, crushing the bone, and his eyes fell out and rolled in the dust at his feet. There we go. So I was talking about the eyes coming out. That was done by Patroclus, book 16. Also, Menelaus kills Drysander, book 13. But also, so Hermas, number 1, best death, most grim death. Hermas, the Trojan, gets a spear in the mouth. The metal point of the spear penetrated under his brain and smashed the white jawbones. His teeth were knocked out, both his eyes filled with blood, and gasping for breath, he blew blood through his mouth and his nostrils. So that was
not an instant death. Yes. That's
in
horrible.
book 16. So there you go. There was the one that surprised me that did not make this list was some guy gets a spear up through the jaw when he's one of the charioteers, and it talks about how the spearman has got the guy hooked like a fish up under his jaw with his spear and is tearing him off the chariot, and then everybody laughs at him. Like he takes a dive off the chariot into the ground with this like hooked like his, and then all the Greeks laugh at him. And I think they even say something like that if he had been like this isn't exactly the quote, but something like, he would be a great diver in the Olympics. Look how he left off that, chariot.
What a horrible last moment is people laughing at the way you're dying. Yeah.
So, we got, so they cataloged use of weapons. So we got rocks, like I said, rocks used quite a bit. 10 deaths, 15 deaths by arrows. These are only explicitly named. 19 deaths by swords, but spears. So this also tells you something about Homeric combat. Okay, spears, very important weapons here. Named uses only. Some weapons are, of course, not specifically named, but 100 deaths by spears. But that, 10 deaths by rocks. I mean, rocks are up there. Rocks are number 4. Arrows only, a little bit before that.
Well, I mean, if you're, I feel like that's interesting to think about. If you're relying on spears and you throw your spear,
there was a lot of throwing spears.
And then you might have another weapon, but maybe you lose that weapon. Okay, time to grab a rock.
Time to bring out this rock here. I'm not leaving. Trojan battle stats by hero. So here are all the Trojans right here. We've got they catalog wounded, killed, attacked from behind, and used arrows. So Hector way out front with 30 named kills during this thing.
Wow.
Where is Aeneas? Aeneas is over here. So
Paris
is over here.
Second, but not even a close second.
But not even a close second. Yeah. Aeneas is not even a close second. Paris is a very, very close third to Aeneas. Even though, but we got wounded. So kills, Aeneas has got it. I mean, so we got attacked from behind too over here. Greek battle stats by hero.
What was that long one?
So Diomedes is up here. I mean, so Diomedes is actually ahead of Achilles. So Diomedes, we've got victim. So he killed a lot of people who were asleep at some time, and then killed, and we got wounded over here. But Patroclus, is ahead of Achilles in named kills. That's fascinating. We got a bunch of kills over here.
Yeah, maybe not over the course of their entire war, but over the course of this part.
Course of this part, right? Yes, of course of this right here. Let's see. what is we got an asterisk by Patroclus. We might see what that is. We'll see what it's talking about. Standout performances in battle. Okay. So the badass goes to Patroclus. So I mean, he is badass. Most kills in one book, 27, including Sarpedion, son of Zeus, 3 opponents to bring him down, including Apollo and Hector, and some guy on the first day of the battle.
Oh, there's your asterisk right there.
Yeah, okay. So, no, the asterisk is another 27 Trojans could be added, but they are unnamed in the book because it says 3 times he attacked and 3 times he killed 9 men. So that's badass emphasis, but those were unnamed. So, yes, so that's 3 times he attacked and 3 times he killed 9 men. So Patroclus, definitely up there. Most overlooked is Diomedes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
35 kills, 3 wounded, including Aeneas and Ares, god of war, and Aphrodite, but 13 of them were asleep. Runner-up Hector with 30 kills. Sneakiest, that's Teucer, 11 killed with arrows. Most consistent, though, is Achilles with 24 kills with no wounds. No wounded.
Just kills.
All spear or sword. Most bloodthirstiest is Agamemnon. During his Aristea in book 11, 1 spear in the head, 2 spears in chest, 1 spear in arm, 1 sword used to cut off head and arms. Most useless Paris. No, by no means the least kills, but for his station comparatively with others, he is pathetic. Challenges Greeks to a duel, then hangs back when Menelaus takes the challenge, has to borrow armor to complete his duel. Aphrodite has to intervene on his behalf to save his life. Only 1 outright good kill, 2 wounds, which is one of which was in a foot. I think that was Menelaus that he killed, or is that Diomedes? One of either Menelaus or Diomedes got a wound in the foot, because he shot him in the foot. 1 kills with an arrow, 1 kills in the back. So there we go. That's
Wait, go to the emotional response. That's not as funny.
So here you go. All right. Methods Homer uses to create emotional responses. Book 16, Similes. Homer allows his non-veteran audience to visualize the events in battle. He fell out of the well-built chariot like a diver. Oh, that must have been the guy I was talking about. Like a pair of mountain lions, each as hungry and fearless as each other, disputing the body of a stag. He uses euphemism and more glorious, appropriate description of a hero's death. Life swiftly left his limbs, and hateful darkness enfolded him. Death enveloped his eyes and cut short his breath.
Such beautiful language.
Invocation of the muse and use of apostrophes. Tell me now, you muses that live on Olympus, how the Greek ships were first set alight. Who was the first man? Who was the last to fall to you, Patroclus? Pathos, revealing details of those about to die, allows the audience to feel closer to them and sadder when they die. He had at one time been a ruler of prosperous Beduan, or foreshadowing their death, gives the pathos of dramatic irony, as the gods summoned you to your death.
Yeah. That's cool. That's a good graphic.
I'll put a link to this graphic in the chat. I thought that was fun. That summarizes. It's like like the battle stats.
Right.
Stats on deaths in the Iliad. You know, I saw some people objecting to this. Like, it's kind of a humorous way to, put together this infographic about all of this. And because somebody was like, what if we did this for World War II? Would you find it as humorous? If
we're talking about a work of literature, and this was in 800 BC. It's the thing about too soon. Is it too soon to make this joke? It is not too soon to make a joke about
the Trojan War
800 BC, about something that had already happened. And we're not even sure if this historical battle did it even happen. It could be completely myth. Like, we don't know. We don't have evidence to know one way or another. So relax.
All right. Well, I think that was fantastic.
That was great. Thank you so much for reintroducing me to the Iliad.
Well, and thank you for being willing to do this on short notice. So we still have big ones. So I need to I need to reach out about Dominion, but we're still going to do the Paradise Lost. You got that? We need to do that one rather soon because I was going to go over that one more time. I listened to it a couple of times and did some analysis. We got to do that one. But then we'll do the Odyssey, and we're going to get into Tolkien. So I think in the future, in the medium term, a lot more classic discussions like this are probably coming.
Yes.
But we will do Arcane. We will consider Arcane when that comes out.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I'm excited and nervous. I'm afraid it's gonna hurt. I think it's gonna be great and it's gonna be sad. Yeah.
Oh, okay, hurt in a good way.
Hurt in a good way. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And if you are watching on replay, thank you so much for watching on replay. Put stuff in the chat. We will respond and watch and things like that. This has been fantastic. I've learned a lot. This is very educational for moving forward. A great piece of research and a great discussion. So I think this is when Table Talk is its best. So we will keep going. Doug will be here next week. I'm not sure we're going to talk about then the week after that. Then Brianna will be back and we'll talk about the cultists. We'll talk about our creative effort. So, yes. All right, everybody. Been fantastic. See you. I'll see you in the morning. I think I'm going to do Advanced Hero Quest in the morning on the Morning Grind on the Heath's Geekverse channel. So, all right. See you in the morning, everybody, over there. Later, everyone.
Good night.